Meeting is recording.
Thanks, Rich. I saw that.
We are live on YouTube.
Do we have Matt Scott in the meeting yet, Madam Clerk? I'm just looking for him on my screen so I can move him, but I don't see him.
No, he's not in the meeting yet.
Or Council due for. I think I got everybody else here.
I believe that's correct. And we're a minute 30 to Shaw.
Yeah, okay.
Thirty seconds to live on Shaw. We are live on Shaw.
I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting this evening. I'd like to thank and recognize our media partners and our broadcasting partners for broadcasting our meeting and reporting on it. Before we get going, I want to just express our solidarity and support for the Muslim community here in Sault Ste. Marie. And I want to express our condolences to the large community in London, the Muslim community in London, the city of London, for the tragic and violent and criminal act that took the lives of innocent people. And on behalf of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, on behalf of City Council, I want to say that we categorically stand against Islamophobia and hatred. And I want to express our complete support for our own Muslim community here in Sault Ste. Marie. And I want to thank the community for reaching out to me last week and including me in activities that memorialized the terrible loss. Madam Clerk, we don't have this yet as a formal part of the agenda. I understand we will get there, but before we begin, I want to just complete a land acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge that the lands that we are on are the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. I want to recognize the Robinson Huron Treaty, the Garden River First Nation, the Batchewana First Nation, the historic Sault Ste. Marie Métis Council, our large urban Indigenous population, and that our community in this geography is historically known as Balating. Madam Clerk, if you could please start the meeting.
Agenda item 1, adoption of minutes. It did come to our attention that we needed a change on the motion with respect to the shopping cart bylaw. The recorded vote had indicated a unanimous, and in fact, Councillor Shoemaker was opposed. So the motion reads, it's by Christian and Gardy, resolved that the minutes of regular council meeting of May 31, 2021 be approved as amended.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
And under agenda item 3, nobody has indicated any pecuniary interest.
Council, any pecuniary interest to note? Seeing none.
And under agenda item 4, I've got a motion by Councillors Christian and Scott, resolved that the agenda for June 14, 2021 City Council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? Motion is carried.
And under proclamations, delegations, agenda item 5.1 is the Snowden Park tragedies.
Thank you, Madam Clerk.
And Ken Crossman is in attendance. Would you like me to read the motion now or at the?
Why don't we read the motion at the end, and we'll just give council some context on this. I'll welcome Mr. Crossman to the meeting. Ken, it's nice to see you again. Thank you for taking the time to attend to our meeting tonight. I know it's been an important milestone in your life, and that being able to talk to City Council about the tragedy that happened in your family's life and to your brother has been really important to you. I want to thank you for the professionalism and engagement you've had with my office. It has been good to work with you, and I'm glad to be part of bringing it to this day. I'm going to defer to the CEO, Mr. White, to give council some context before you speak to some of the work staff has been doing here. When Mr. White is done speaking, Mr. Crossman, we will give you the floor, and then you can talk to council however you wish. Mr. White.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, as you're aware from my report, this was started by the Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association, wishing to recognize the drownings of 2 Indigenous residential school students back in 1914 to 15 at the Shingwauk Residential School. As they worked through the process of researching the facts of this, they did discover that another drowning death had occurred on the same site in 1960, and that was Mr. Crossman's brother, Gerald, who unfortunately perished at the time. As the report notes, the Children of Shingwauk have been guided through their efforts to recognize these tragedies by the principles of truth and reconciliation. Certainly after researching the aspects of Gerald Crossman's passing, they certainly felt that the city and Mr. Crossman should go through the process of reconciliation themselves, and that is why Mr. Crossman is here tonight. As the report notes, you are being asked to confirm a letter of apology that has been conveyed to Mr. Crossman, and also to authorize staff to work with the Memorial Committee of the Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association to develop plans for a suitable memorial to recognize the 3 lives that were lost at the Snowden Park site over the last century. I'm now going to have Mr. Crossman speak. He's going to share his story to give you some more context as to why he's here tonight. Go ahead, Mr. Crossman.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Provenzano, Malcolm White, and City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to tell my story. In 1956, the city of Sault Ste. Marie purchased a piece of property that contained a large pond located at the corner of Florin Drive and Shannon Road, now known as Snowden Park, next to the Shingwauk Indian Residential School. The city initially used this property to dump waste and garbage that was trucked from the city incinerator that was located in the Wellington Street East and Florin Drive area. In 1958, then Councillor McIntyre voiced concerns regarding the dangers that this practice posed to the residents living in this area. As children passed through this dumping ground to walk to Animal Cray Public School and who also played in the area, there was no proper fencing around the pond, and the area was home to rats because of the garbage being dumped there. He was concerned about the possible liability, possible liability that this posed to the city. At the time, our family lived at 212 Shannon Road across the street from the pond. On Saturday, February 27th, 1960, my 2 brothers, Robert and Gerald, ages 8 and 10, respectively, were playing by the pond. Robert slipped down the 20-foot embankment and fell into the sewage garbage-filled icy water. Gerald tried to help his brother, and he fell in as well. Both called out for help, and 4 young girls from the Shingwalk Indian Residential School heard their cries for help. One helped Robert grab a floating board while another ran to a neighboring house to get help. The fire department responded as they were able to get Robert out of the pond and were able to revive him. Unfortunately, Gerald had gone under and could not be seen. A police scuba diver had to be called in to help search for Gerald. He had a difficult time trying to locate the body, taking almost an hour and a half due to the sewage and garbage-filled water. Gerald's body was recovered just as my father Charles arrived at the scene. He clapped at the sight of the scuba diver holding Gerald's body over his shoulder. Gerald was pronounced dead on February 27th, 1960, on my father's birthday. Robert was never the same since the incident. He was never taken to the hospital as seen by a doctor after the incident, even though he was unconscious for some time. While the neighborhood raised $100 to help for funeral costs for Gerald, the city of Sault Ste. Marie failed to reach out to our family for what happened on that day. The city eventually filled in the pond and created a park on the site. This accident was front page news and well covered by the Sioux Star at that time. This incident shattered our family. My father started to drink heavily and became very abusive to my mother and my siblings. My mother struggled to raise 7 children on her own while mourning the loss of her son and dealing with my abusive father. There was not a lot of direction due to the situation, and the home life for the children were terrifying as well. We were all fearful of my father. In 1978, my brother Keith died at the age of 24 when he fell from a balcony to his death. In 1979, my brother David was 21 and he burned up in a house fire. In 1980, my brother John, who was 20 years old, was crushed in a truck rollover. In 2009, my father Charles passed away at the age of 86, and in 2015, my mother Edith died. She was 88. In the 70s, we made several requests to the city to have some sort of memorial erected at Snowden Park to remember Gerald. Our requests at that time were ignored by various mayors and councillors. That's pretty well my story, but I would like to extend a sincere thank you to Ed Sadowski and Irene Barbeau for the support they have provided me. Thank you to Mayor Provenzano and Malcolm White for their understanding and for the letter of apology. On behalf of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, this is the closure for my family that I wanted, and I thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing your family story with Council, Ken. I know that is challenging, difficult, and I'm sure Council is as impacted as I was when I sat with you and heard it myself. Madam Clerk, if you can read the resolution, then we can answer any questions Council has or take any comments that Council might have. And we could hopefully move forward and work with Ken and the children of Shingwalk to do something appropriate at the site.
A motion by Councillors Christian and Scott, resolved that the report of the CAO dated June 14, 2021 concerning Snowden Park tragedies be received, and that Council confirm the letter of apology to the Crossman family and authorize staff to work with the Children of Shingwalk Alumni Association Memorial Committee to develop plans for a suitable memorial at the Snowden Park site.
And I should tell Council that we will have the children of Shingwalk to Council to share the information story they want to share, but it was very important to them that Mr. Crossman come first and independently and share his family story with Council. So Council, you have you've read the apology that was written on behalf of the city. You have the report in front of you. We've had an opportunity to hear from Mr. Crossman. Do we have any questions of staff or any comments? I do want to recognize Councillor Hollingsworth, who reached out early in this process about this and reached out to both Malcolm and I asking what we could do and how we could work together. So I want to recognize her work on this too. Council, I take that as probably unanimous support to move forward, and unanimous support for both the letter of apology and to move forward and to develop a memorial. So we will call a vote on it. All in favor? Mr. Crossman, I can confirm that it's received council's unanimous support. So you'll continue to work with myself, but to a larger degree, Malcolm and city staff. And we'll make sure that we move on to the next stage of this and work with the children of Shinwalk respectfully. And we'll do something that everybody's agreeable to and can be proud of as an appropriate memorial for the loss.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crossman.
Mr. Mayor, agenda item 5.2 is the Dennis Street Terminal relocation, but perhaps the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day proclamation, which has been added by addendum, should be read first.
Let's do that. Let's go to 5.3. So I have a proclamation here, Council, that was requested for World Elder Abuse Day. Whereas senior citizens deserve to be treated with respect and dignity to enable them to serve as leaders, mentors, volunteers, and important members of Ontario and their respective communities. And whereas World Elder Abuse Awareness Day is recognized annually throughout the country and around the world to raise visibility of elder abuse by sharing information about abuse and neglect, along with promoting resources and services that increase senior safety and well-being. It is an official United Nations International Day acknowledging the significance of elder abuse as a public health and human rights issue. Whereas elder abuse takes many different forms: emotional, physical, financial, neglect, abandonment, and sexual, it is estimated that 10% of older adults will experience one or more forms of abuse at some point during their senior years. This represents up to 370,000 older adults in Canada, and 160,000 of these older adults live in Ontario. And whereas the Senior Rights Protection Council of Sault Ste. Marine area recognizes the importance of taking action to create social change to prevent, educate, and raise awareness of abuse and neglect of older adults. Whereas Tuesday, June 15th, the Senior Rights Protection Council of Sault Ste. Marine will join communities across Ontario and around the world to raise awareness of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. Everyone in our community is encouraged to promote seniors' rights and ensure seniors are being treated with respect and with dignity. And therefore, I, Christian Provenzano, as Mayor of the City of Sault Ste. Marie, hereby proclaim June 15th, 2021 as World Elder Abuse Awareness Day in the City of Sault Ste. Marie, and encourage all of our residents to recognize and celebrate seniors and their ongoing contributions to the success and vitality of our community and Ontario. Thank you. Now, Madam Clerk, are we, in discussing with the CEO, are we going to get to the Dennis Street Terminal issue after consent, after planning, or are we going to try and do it before planning? My understanding, Mr. CEO, is that we would go to the consent agenda, try and deal with the consent agenda, and then if we had time, come back to that.
Yes, I think that's the wisest course of action tonight, given that we're not sure how long the terminal discussion will be.
Yeah. So, Council, if there's no objection to that, what we'll do is we'll deal with the consent agenda, and then if we have time before planning, we can start that. If we don't, we'll do planning, and then we'll come back to the Dennis Street Terminal relocation matter. So, items on the consent agenda. Council, do we have any items on the consent agenda? Councillor Vezo-Allen.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, probably to Mr. Ver, 6.1 with the modular units. Mr. Ver, did you consult with any downtown association staff concerning the modular units prior to ordering?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Vezo-Allen. At this point, we're seeking council approvals to procure the modular retail units. So we haven't ordered. With that said, I had a brief conversation with members of the Downtown Association, and we anticipate further conversations with the Downtown Association as we work to finalize the criteria and the setup of the modular retail units.
So from my understanding, we won't know how many units until you determine what will be in them. So obviously, if something is equipped with a kitchen, that would obviously be more expensive than if you have a empty modular unit. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezowalan, the price that you have before you, we anticipate that we would be able to acquire 6 modular units, and that would include 1 full-service kitchen and 2 other food service, but not full kitchen units, and then the other 3 would be retail. So we would propose to proceed with that quantity and mix of retail units.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I don't have any further questions. Thank you, Mr. Ver.
Anybody else on 6.1? Was that you, Councillor Christian? Go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question concerning 6.2, which is related to 6.1. So I don't know if you want to hear it now or wait.
No, we can deal with 6.2.
Okay,
We can
thank
do them
you.
together.
Yeah. Well, my question, perhaps I can give this to through you to Mr. Ver. My question is, in the report, it says that the units would be made available to the mill market in the interim until the plaza is developed. Will they, who assumes responsibility for liability insurance and any damage to the units when they're there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we did envision that the units would stay the property of the city of Sault Ste. Marie during that time frame. So
Okay.
the city would be, responsible or taking care of any damage there.
Sure, which is reasonable considering that they're taking possession while we work through the plaza development. One other question, the mill market, according to the report, the mill market will be making the decision about which retailers would be using them while at the mill market. When these units then find their way to the plaza, will it be a joint effort by city staff and the downtown association to determine the makeup of those retail outlets at the plaza?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that's correct. We envision the city working with the downtown association and likely with the mill market, to be honest, on the types of businesses that are going into that into those units.
Okay, thank you very much. That's it for me, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody on 6.1 or 6.2? Okay. Anybody else with items on the consent agenda? Councillor Dufour and then Councillor Hilsinger.
Mr. Mayor, 6.9, please. The amendments to the property standards bylaw.
Go ahead.
Okay. First off, I just wanted to thank staff for what I think is really good work on what we have so far. I know it's been a long time coming, and that obviously this is something that the task force recommended nearly a year ago. But in that interim, I think that the evidence of the work is very clear in the bylaw. I have a few questions through you, Mr. Mayor, to whomever's handling the legal inquiries today. Just for the benefit of the community, there's a lot of legalese obviously in the bylaw. Could you please take us through how this would change the tools that we have available to us as a city when dealing with a building such as some of the ones that have burnt down in the last 3 months?
So go ahead, Ms. Fields.
I'm going to actually ask Jeffrey King to answer this. He did most of the work on this bylaw.
Okay, Mr. King.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Essentially, what this tool does is equips our bylaw enforcement officers with the ability to write orders on a moment's notice and allowing them to basically demand that the order comply with anything that they feel is necessary to secure the property. So it could be as straightforward as boarding up the property, potentially fencing the property, moving up to such things as having security posted 24/7 around the property. And ultimately, they can look at an order that would seek that the building itself be demolished. So this power is basically drawn upon from the Municipal Act. We've created a bylaw that's specific to enable them to do so. What was set out in the property standard bylaw beforehand was primarily and solely based on the building code, and there were certainly limitations set out in that provincial statute that didn't allow for such a strong tool on the enforcement's belt. So we're hopeful that this tool can be applied to situations that need immediate action.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. King. I think that's going to be a huge help to our community. One of the other questions I had is in this bylaw, I noticed there's no language around registering orders on title. Can you talk a bit about why it is that the city doesn't register orders on title, and what are the reasons for that rationale?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour. Registering on title was a past practice that was used by the municipality. It is stipulated under the building code that when an order is deemed applicable or is confirmed, it can be registered on the title to the property. That doesn't exactly remedy compliance. So what we found was that we would take an order, register it against the title of that property, it would remain there, and the property owner wouldn't necessarily rectify what needs to be done. This new tool would hopefully see that compliance achieved. And what we do alternatively is we will take an order, proceed before provincial offense court for the charge of failing to comply with an order. And that seems to get results in terms of compliance and has fines associated with it, which we feel is a better deterrence than simply registering a document on the title to the property.
Okay, if I'm to understand correctly, Mr. King, would your department still consider using title registration on an as-needed basis, or is the idea that this bylaw will replace all need for title registration?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, we certainly wouldn't rule it out. It is a tool that the province allows, and there can be circumstances where it is the only tool perhaps that's necessary, but it is certainly the tool of last resort. So we would hope to jump through the provisions that are set out in the building code to seek compliance, as well as this new bylaw, before running to the need to register that order against title.
Okay, thanks, Mr. King. To kind of continue on the conversation about the enforceability of the bylaw, can you speak a bit about the new provisions that exist under this bylaw to allow the city to collect some of these fines and monies owed?
Certainly. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Dufour, with leaning towards the Municipal Act and the provisions thereunder, it certainly extends the ability to the municipality to collect upon any of the work that needs to be done under those orders specific to situations where they're boarding up buildings or they're putting up fencing or what's needed to rectify those vacant buildings. We're looking at the ability under that Municipal Act to leverage those costs as taxes, but those taxes aren't limited as they are set out in the building code to the property itself. It does allow the languages there that expands it to register those taxes against other properties that are owned within the city of Sault Ste. Marie. So that does expand the tool and the reach to collect upon any of those orders that are set out.
Thank you very much, Mr. King. My last question for you has to do with internal resources at the legal department. Does this new bylaw add to what would have been our typical workload at the legal department dealing with these issues, or does it detract from it?
So with respect to that, it does set out in our report that it'll necessarily be handled with the existing complement. Certainly as you develop additional language and more enforcement, there's always the need for support both on an enforcement and a prosecution front. But we certainly will start by seeing how it plays out and how much of this is brought before the courts. So it's difficult to say it will increase the workload at this time. It certainly will impact it, but to what degree it's hard to state firmly at this point in time. But again, with this report and other reports that are on, the minute you increase any of the enforcement of a piece of a bylaw, there certainly is work that follows.
Okay, well, I certainly hope that your department and obviously CEO White will keep us abreast of those developments. Thank you very much for your work on this, Mr. King. That's all my questions, Mayor Provenzano.
Thank you, Councilor Dufour. Councilor Bruni, I have you wanting to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Prosecutor King. Would this speed up the process? And can we use, say, a burnt building, building that has to be torn down? Will it speed up the process to have the building removed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, this certainly will speed up the process. The before provisions under the property standard bylaw carrying upon the building code, there were certain restrictions set out there in terms of the duration the order would stand, the appeal process under that order. This is a simple notice that's provided by the bylaw enforcement officer with a timeline that falls within their discretionary power to set out, and compliance hopeful thereafter. If not, the municipality can intervene and seek that compliance through doing it themselves and then collecting the cost thereafter through those means that were explained earlier.
So if a building has been vacant for 2, 3 years, 4 years, there has not been a fire and it's just been vacant, the process can be speeded up, I guess, sped up to have that building demolished?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councilor Bruni, yes, it would be a quicker process than what was originally stipulated under the property standard bylaw.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
No problem, Councilor Bruni. I have Councilor Gardy next.
It was more of a comment, Mr. Mayor. I just think, based upon the amount of calls that I get, and I think some of our colleagues get, these property standards are at the forefront of people's minds. I think as we move forward and continue to make sure that this is a priority for us, we have to seriously consider ensuring that the building department and legal has the appropriate resources to do what we want to do. So I just think we need to consider that over the course of the next several months as we approach next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on 6.9? Councilor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As a member of the task force, I also want to reiterate Councilor Dufour's comments. I want to thank all of staff who worked on this, on the amendments to the property standards bylaw. I think it'll go a long way in resolving a lot of the issues that we deal with. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Nero. I'll just add my compliments to that, to the task force for your work on this and bringing this through staff and to staff for the work that you did, specifically the legal department, but I also want to recognize the engineering department and property standards and Don and Freddie and Karen. This is an important development. I think this is exactly what we need to be doing. And I'm glad that we have better enforcement tools for our staff. But I'm going to echo the comment, and the more work we do add and the more tools we give them, and the more expectations we have of them being proactive on property standards, the more resources they're going to require to do that. So we have to have that discussion at budget time. So thank you for staff on this. We'll move on. Do you have any additional items, Councilor Dufour? Next on my list is Councilor Hilsinger. Councilor Hilsinger, you had an item on the consent agenda. 6:10, I believe. You're on mute still, Councilor Hilsinger.
Thank you. Yes, it's 6.10. I just wanted to speak quickly to this. It's a comment. The smoking issues on the hub trail surrounding the area of the Sioux Area Hospital have been a very significant concern for many of the residents, both in Ward 3 where it's located, but also people in general that use the trail and ride the whole trail, etc. Councillor Shoemaker and I certainly over the last year or so, or I guess maybe even 2 years, tried meeting with the hospital and Algoma Public Health to come to some resolution on how we could get this stopped. It's really unfair for people who are trying to recreate or move from point to point in a healthy way to have to suffer with the cigarette smoking that's allowed there. And I do hope that this resolution to put the ability in the hands of the security officers to issue tickets will help reduce and or eliminate smoking in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hilsinger. Anybody else in 610? Seeing none. Councillor Hilsinger, was that your only matter on consent?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Shoemaker, I have you next on my list here.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Scott had his hand up there for 610, but so I'm happy to let him go.
Sorry, no, I didn't. He's not showing here. Councillor Scott, go ahead. 610.
Sorry, I did have a quick question. Am I understanding this correctly then, based on the interpretation that I just kind of heard? Does this give the security guards the right to issue tickets on the hub trail, or is it just the hospital property?
Ms. Fields, are you going to be able to take this question?
On the hub trail, so there's no smoking on the hub trail as we have it now. APH inspectors, officers do that. I would ask Jeff King to come back on this one as to whether, oh, there you go, as to whether it's simply, I know it's around and on public areas, so I think it would, but Jeff, do you want to weigh in?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott. The way we've worded the deputization of these officers is that they certainly can enforce the bylaw upon the hub trail. They're not tasked specifically with doing that. We do see the situation often where that's a near piece of property that individuals are utilizing to smoke in that area. Certainly in discussion, the idea would be that if a security officer noted someone in that area, they had the power to do so. Algoma Public Health has 2 enforcement officers that enforce this legislation across the Algoma district. So they certainly don't have the ability to be there on a daily basis doing so. So that is why we worded it that way, was we were hopeful that that is how it will play out. But it's certainly something that we'll have to see if they get to that portion of the area, understanding that that hospital is quite a large site.
And sorry, forgive me, because I may not understand a lot of, how the legal aspects of this. Is it written and laid out in a way that their responsibility of the hub trail is just that subsection, or is it kind of open-ended and theoretically they could be somewhere else on the hub trail, not near the hospital property, and still be able to issue a ticket?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Scott, it's been worded so it's the Sioux area hospital and the surrounding area. Specifically, it'd be that stretch of hub trail that would abut the property. The security guards are posted on the Sioux area hospital, so it would be simply difficult for them to be enforcing it some 20 so kilometers away. So the intention is that if they're doing a patrol of the property and they do note someone smoking in that area, they would have the ability to give them a ticket, yes.
Okay, thank you. That was everything on that item. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. King.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Shoemaker, your matter?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's the Fire Training Center, which is 6.6.
Yeah.
Through you to Chief Johnson. Chief, the financial implications state that there will be some future cost for props, and it doesn't really set out what they are. I'm sure you've looked into generally the cost of them, but do we still believe that even if props are needing to be acquired, that this will be a profit center for the fire department?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Yeah, we do believe there'll be a small revenue for us, although it's hard to say at this time because it's so early on, and we're going to do it by baby steps, a couple courses each year, and build from there.
Okay, yeah, and is there an opportunity? It sounds to me like the centralized fire training college, if you can call it that, is shutting down, for lack of a better word. Is there an opportunity to get some of the equipment we might need from there at this time?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, there is props available through the fire college. If we're going to host a certain course, we can recommend or request that those props get brought to us. So that'll help us save some money as well if we don't have to purchase them, if they're available through the fire college. The college is closing, like the bricks and mortar part of it, but they're still going to have their props available to support us.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that's helpful information. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else in 6.6? Councillor Holland, go ahead.
Sorry, I just had to get off mute. Thank you, through your worship, to Chief Johnson. We, as a community, have many volunteer fire departments in the surrounding area. And so I think, as Councillor Shoemaker was saying, this is a potential revenue maker for us. And I think it's excellent for our community having this additional training. I'm under the assumption that you'll probably reach out to the volunteer fire departments in the area to try to bring them into our potential courses and training. Can you just elaborate on that?
Sure. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, definitely we reach out to the other departments in the municipality areas. We will definitely be including them. We want to make this the regional training center. Anytime that we're going to host a course, we will make sure that they're aware of it. If they can attend, we're happy to have them. If there's a course that they want to have hosted, they can recommend that to us, and we'll put that forward and host it for them as well.
Okay, great. Again, we have like Prince Township and so forth that we are close with. So this is good news. Thank you. That's all.
Okay. Anybody else in 6.6? Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief Johnson, just for clarification on this point, did I not read recently that Prince also has their own training center, just like this is proposed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, no, they don't have their own training center. They have their training, like the hall, they have a training room at their station in Prince, but they don't have a regional training center.
So when we speak regional, how many would have that that certification like we're going to?
Right now, the province is looking at about 8 to 10 regional training centers across the province. Right now, I think they'd like to develop that. But from what my understanding is in the talks with the Ontario Fire College, if we are given this this designation, there wouldn't be another one in the immediate vicinity. We would just want all the surrounding municipalities to work with us.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Problem. Anybody else in 6.6? I agree, Chief Johnson. It's a good initiative and a nice development, and I'm supportive of it.
Thank you.
Councillor Shoemaker, do you have any other matters on consent?
I don't. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Council, do we have any other matters on the consent agenda? I see none, Madam Clerk, so that would be the end of the consent agenda from my perspective.
Yes, I'll just read the consent motion. It's a motion by Councillors Hollingsworth and Gardy. Resolved that all the items listed under date June 14, 2021, agenda item 6, consent agenda, be approved as recommended.
All in favor? Motion is carried. I think then, Madam Clerk, the only other matter we have prior to planning, or with the exception of planning, is the transit relocation matter. So I think we would get to that at this point. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
We
And
certainly have
Mr.
time.
McDonald?
Yeah, we certainly have time before planning for the presentation. So we have Mr. McDonald with us.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of council for having me tonight to speak on this report and assessment that we've completed. I understand the need to go into planning at 5:30, so I will do my best to finish this up by then, and I'll stick around for questions and comments after.
Mr. McDonald, just before you get going here, Madam Clerk, do you have to read the resolution at the outset? I think that would probably be the best thing, no? And then Mr. Ver, I'm not sure if you're speaking to this before, or Mr. Lamming before Mr. McDonald is, or we're going right to Mr. McDonald.
So the motion is by Councillors Hollingsworth and Scott, resolved that the report of the Director of Community Services dated June 14, 2021 concerning Dennis Street Terminal relocation be received, and that an RFP be issued to obtain a consultant to complete construction drawings and administer the tendering process for the renovation build of the 111 Huron Street Transit Facility.
Okay, so that's the motion. Do we have city staff? Are you speaking to this before we go to Mr. McDonald, or are we going directly to Mr. McDonald? Mr. Lamming, I have you on my screen here.
Mr. Mayor, yes, we can go right into Mr. McDonald in the interest of time, and then happy to take questions after planning.
Okay. Welcome to council, Mr. McDonald. The floor is yours, and we look forward to your presentation.
Again, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Thank you for having me to present this. The city of Sault Ste. Marie engaged us in the fall of 2020 to look at relocating the possibility or options of relocating the existing terminal to 111 Huron Street or to stay and upgrade the existing terminal site. There was also two fringe options on the table with various parking alternatives on Queen Street and Bay Street, which resulted from a previous study, which I will go forward with here shortly. Next slide, please, Ms. Uppa. First and foremost, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks to Mr. Lamming and Mrs. Maioni. Their help and their resources in completing the study is invaluable. Specifically, their knowledge with respect to transit operations, their ridership info was second to none. And I want to extend the thanks, and council should be aware of their hard work and dedication to this. Next slide, please. As I'm sure council by now is all aware of the environmental assessment process, which the engineering department and municipalities undertake in order to plan various projects. This project is no different. It falls under what we term as a Schedule A municipal class environmental assessment. A municipal class environmental assessment is unique in a way that Schedule A and A plus are essentially deemed by the province to be projects that have minimal environmental impact, as compared to a Schedule B or Schedule C project, which are much more in depth and are planned accordingly. A Schedule A and A plus are exempt projects from Part 2 of the Environmental Assessment Act. For the information of council, a Part 2 is the appeal process of an environmental assessment. Thus, it is exempt. It's formally referred to as a pre-approved project, but the wording of that has just recently been changed to an exempt project. The implications of that is that the decision of council tonight is final, and there is no appeal process from a member of the public to the province. The second item with respect to the Class EA process is the consultation requirements between a Schedule A, Schedule B, and Schedule C. In a Schedule B process, the minimum consultation requirements are such that advertisement of notice of public commencement to the public. There is a presentation or a public consultation with respect to the preliminary preferred alternative, where the consultant completes all their studies and selects a preliminary preferred, and then goes out to the public to solicit comment, concerns, feedback, etc. Similarly with the Schedule C, there's actually a second public consultation phase. Once the, I want to say the design, for lack of better words, is more refined. A notice of study completion is then published with the province and in local newspapers and to the public. And then the project proceeds from there, provided there is no bump up request. During the planning, the initial phases of this study in consultation with the city, it was determined that the requirements of Schedule A plus consultation, which is limited to the city strictly notifying the public of a project. There's essentially no need for a consultation. It is, we are doing this. Credit staff, this was deemed inappropriate, and public consultation, increased public consultation with respect to this project was implemented, and we'll go through that later in the presentation. Next slide, please. The existing terminal located at the corner of Queen and Dennis was constructed in the early 80s. It's a single-story wood-framed and masonry building, and has an approximate area or size of 2,200 square feet. The 2018 asset management plan, completed by another consultant on behalf of the city, concluded that approximately $377,000 in maintenance and repairs would be required over the next 5 years. I'd also like to note that this report was prepared in 2018, so that 5-year time frame is, we were essentially at the twilight of that. At the time in 2018, the estimated cost to renovate the existing building was $272,000. We have adjusted that cost to attempt to reflect for 2021 pricing and for the wide variations in materials costs that we are seeing in the construction sector now due to external factors such as the pandemic. Generally speaking, the problem or the opportunity presents itself primarily for 2 reasons. One is the federal government and the province has come out with the ISIP, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, transit stream, and has provided the city with significant dollar amounts to allocate towards their transit system. This includes not only buses and other transportation related upgrades, but also facilities upgrades that can be applied to. With the terminal reaching the end of its useful life, the opportunity exists to look at various alternatives. The existing terminal, due to its age, congested site, its experiences problems with the AODA compliance, accessible washrooms, accessibility, et cetera, on the site, deteriorating conditions, and operational issues such as the requirement for transit operators to deadhead from there to the 111 Huron Street, has led for the city to consider this relocation. I'd also like to point out that this opportunity has presented itself in numerous past reports that the city has completed. And we'll go through that here in the next slide. As the segue from the previous slide, in 2018, the city had a transit route optimization study completed by the Transit Consulting Network. In that report, various downtown terminal options were presented. As I alluded to at the start of the presentation, on-street bus parking along Queen Street, on-street bus parking along Bay Street were 2 options, which fell off the running fairly quickly due to traffic and pedestrian safety. The 2 other options were to provide a bus transit terminal location at the transit center, and the other option that was presented was maintain the stay and upgrade option of the existing terminal. There are also additional studies, as I alluded to previously, additional studies such as the 2017 Transit Relocation Feasibility Study looked at consolidating transit operations in Sackville, so moving the 111 Huron Street maintenance facility up to the Sackville. That was not recommended in the EA due to the operational issues that the city would continue to experience. An additional recommendation in that report was to again review relocating the Dennis Street Terminal to 111 Huron Street in order to improve operations. There's also been various council reports dating back to 2005 that has, I don't want to say recommended, but has indicated the opportunity to move the Dennis Street Terminal to 111 Huron Street to recognize the operational efficiencies and increase safety, etc. Something that I do want to draw attention to, and what occurred in 2005 as part of the GFL construction, the new arena construction, is the existing terminal used to have the ability for buses to completely encircle the existing building, to pull in 360 degrees around that existing building. Due to zoning and parking requirements for the new GFL Center, that parking lot was split, and thus the parking lot, which you see on the north and west sides of the building, was created separate from the terminal location. That required a realignment or a reorganization of the buses to the south side of the building along Queen Street. That has congested the site. That has created a number of pedestrian conflicts, and it does limit the ability for the city to expand the number of buses that could be located at that site. Next slide, please. So, building on the 2018 Transit Route Optimization Study, we looked at the proposed location of 111 Huron Street and went through the checklist to completing the diligence for the life cycle costs, the economics. Can the site be upgraded to the AODA compliant facilities? Are operational and safety improvements recognized at the new site? Will moving the terminal achieve these goals? Will improve the communications, management, traffic staff, maintenance, and of utmost importance was, can this be done without decreasing service levels? In terms of the movement of riders, efficiency in the system, ease of use of the transit system, was something that was weighed heavily on our recommendations. Next slide, please. No decrease in transit service levels is a primary concern of the operations staff. What has come out of the Transit Route Optimization Study was a series of recommendations. Return of late evening Sunday service, that has been successfully implemented by the city. The establishment of east-west connectors to reduce the need to travel downtown to transfer, that is ongoing. The feasibility of establishing a central northern transit mobility hub, essentially the northern transfer hub, that has been completed and is now in service. Reduce the times needed to get from point A to B anywhere in the city to within 60 minutes, that is in progress. And the latest discussions I've had with staff, that is progressing quite well. Transit fare pricing, use of smart card technology is in progress. Confirmation that a downtown transit terminal should be retained. There is no doubt that a downtown terminal is needed based on the spoke style system that the current system operates at. Accelerated fleet renewal and modernization. I'm sure Mr. Lamming will be happy to report to you here after me that there are 14 new buses to arrive in 2021. And embracing new technology to improve fare collection and provide real-time schedule information, ongoing monitoring is in progress. And that I believe is going to be incorporated with the new bus system, or the new buses coming. We do recognize that the transit cannot be all things to all people, but the the Kevin Costner film, Field of Dreams. If you build it, they will come. If you make it easy for the users and efficient for users, it has been shown that you increase ridership. So that is the goal. Next slide, please. The existing terminal continues to experience deterioration. It is in need of a new roof. The HVAC system is on its last legs and is in need of some attention. The accessibility and barrier-free concerns of the current washroom setup, there's no easy way to reconfigure it. The existing washrooms just aren't large enough to meet current AODA compliance. The new, and for example, like the new turnaround for wheelchair, the full-size adult change tables that are now required for AODA compliance. These are the things that we looked at when assessing the accessibility and ease of upgrading the existing building. The remaining life of the asset, per the asset management report, they have identified that this building is at or near the end of its useful life. There are inadequate facilities for security, staff facilities, oversight, security cameras, things to improve the safety for both staff and the public. As well as deteriorating interior facilities, the exterior infrastructure is also in need of attention. New roof. We live in a very harsh climate where the asphalt and the curbs are at that point of their life where we will start seeing acceleration of deterioration. Next slide, please. Improving safety is a top priority for the city, both for their staff and for the public. The terminal has an average of 9.9 reportable incidents per month over the last 3 years. By reportable incidents, that does not necessarily involvement by the Sault Ste. Marie Police Services, but it is a reportable offense by security with transit. Operations are remote from other transit staff, that if there is an issue, they are further down the road. Response times are lacking. If there is a maintenance issue or something like that, which I'll touch on later, that poses challenges as well. These items can be addressed by upgrading security systems within the existing terminal. However, that does not address the remoteness for other staff. Next slide, please. The Dance Street terminal has a number of inefficiencies with the current facilities. By relocating to 111 Huron Street, AODA compliance can be achieved. I'm hesitant to say it's a little bit more of a blank slate, but the renovations due to the space are easier. Bus pathways and pedestrian safety can be improved. If you recall my discussion on the Queen Street and when the buses all had to be relocated to the Queen Street side of the existing terminal, that created conflict points with pedestrians walking on the sidewalk on Queen Street, blind spots, and more unwanted interaction between pedestrians and buses. The layout that can be achieved at the 111 Huron Street addresses that, and it does make for a safer, less congested site. Staff being located at the end of points, there's no deadhead requiring. This works out to be a significant consideration from the point of air emissions and also fuel savings. Approximately $66,000 a year can be saved in fuel alone by the loss of this deadheading amount. If there is a breakdown Staff are there, and it's an easier place to switch buses out should a breakdown or a switching of buses be required due to a maintenance issue. Next slide, please. A review, the city of Sault Ste. Marie, when we were staff and ourselves, when we were discussing service levels, a key consideration that we wanted to keep in mind was the ability for people to continue to access and get on and off at their location. There's a large number of existing stops within the downtown core. It was felt at the start, prior to optimizing any routes, that if we can maintain or expand as many existing stops and routes within the downtown core, specifically through and by the existing Dennis Street terminal location, then the impacts could be reduced by any sort of move. For example, and I'll use this, if a patron was traveling to the Station Mall, 3 of the 7 routes currently go to the mall themselves. If a proposed move to 111 Huron Street occurs, 5 of the 7 routes will still traverse past the Queen and Dennis Street intersection. So if a stop was maintained there, people would continue to get off the stop at Queen and Dennis and walk to the mall, as many still do, as evidenced by a rider survey. The 2 West End routes would transfer at the 111 Huron Street, and they would simply get on a bus that had a direct route to the mall. That to us is a good example of how these service levels can be maintained. And we have to recognize the destination of the user. The tendency of users is to get off at the stop nearest to their destination.
John, Christian speaking here. We actually are at 5:33, so I'm going to have to put you on a pause here. We can stay on this slide, and maybe you can pick up on this slide when we come back after planning, but I think we need to get to planning, and then we'll come back to you. You can finish your presentation, and then we'll go to city staff, and then we'll go to councilors. So I apologize for that, John, but we're going to have to put you on pause here for a minute.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, if you can take us to the planning part of our agenda tonight, please.
Agenda item 7.1 is application A1221Z, 899 Second Line West. And we have David Topin, the applicant, in the meeting, as well as 5 people who've registered to speak.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. McConnell, are you speaking to this tonight on behalf of planning?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I am.
So I'll ask you to give a short precis to everybody watching at home about the application, and then we'll go to the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This application is for property on the south side of Second Line West. Many people will remember the property as the former Brookfield Market property. The application before council is a rezoning to retain the existing house which fronts onto Second Line and to construct 5 new townhouse units with frontage on North Eden Street. This application has been reviewed by staff and is recommended for approval. As the clerk mentioned, Mr. David Topin is the applicant and he is on the line tonight. Both Mr. Topin and myself are available to answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mr. Topin, did you want to speak to the application?
No, just thank you for having me, and Mr. McConnell summarized it nicely.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. We will go to, is there anybody else, Mr. Topin, with you that wants to speak to the application?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so we have a number of parties registered to speak against the application, but before we get to those parties, I was going to give council an opportunity to ask any questions of the applicant that they might have.
Sure.
or Mr. McConnell. Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, there's been a number of pieces of correspondence that discuss how the neighborhood in the area is single detached homes for the most part. Just down the road here, right at the corner of Outside Road and Second Line, there's a significant development, a development of a substantial size with townhouses, some mixture of townhouses and semis, I believe. Do you know how many units, like generally speaking, are in that development? It seems to me it's, you know, upwards of 50, between 50 and 100 maybe.
Through you, Mayor Provenzano, to Councillor Shoemaker. I don't know off the top of my head, but I would estimate about 50 units in that complex, yes.
Okay. And that's like 200-300 feet from here, I would say.
That's correct.
Okay. And so obviously is the recommendation of planning is in the report, but is this a compatible use with the surrounding uses? Maybe not the immediate adjacent uses, but the uses in the general vicinity of the area?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, yes, it is. I mean, I understand the neighbor's concern, which is, it's a very old subdivision. It's part of the Veterans Land Act. It's largely single-family homes. It's largely half-acre lots. I'm very familiar with the area. I lived there myself for a number of years. But the lot that is what's being proposed is 5 units, basically on the lot that fronts on the corner of Second Line and North Eden Street. I do think this is very compatible with the location that as proposed as it is. And that is the staff recommendation on this.
Thank you. And remind me, was there some other proposal that came for this property a year, maybe a year and a half ago to, I think they were going to acquire a portion of the street and narrow the street a little bit and do some other things. I don't remember the specifics of it, but.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that's correct. That was actually 4 or 5 years ago. There was a proposal to basically construct 2 additional single-family homes on the rear of the property. At that time, the applicant wished to acquire a portion of the street as well to expand the lot. He then, subsequent to council's approval, changed his mind and did not pursue that application any further.
So that would have been just two single-family dwellings.
That's correct.
Okay. I remember, I don't know if you remember the specifics of it. I do remember there being opposition to that at the time as well. Was there not?
Yes, there was.
Okay. Okay, those are all my questions.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Shoemaker. I have a list here of Councillor Bruni next. Councillor Bruni, you have questions for Mr. McConnell or the applicant?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, to Mr. Topan or to Mr. McConnell. Did you have an open house through Zoom at all with the residents in the area?
Mr. Mayor, if I could answer that, I will give Mr. Topan an opportunity to speak on that. Some time back, we instituted a process where we require applicants to have open houses. Obviously, under COVID circumstances, that's simply not possible. What we have been having the applicants do is then send a letter to all of the neighbors who live within 120 meters, who own property within 120 meters of the site. Mr. Topan did that. And I believe, Mr. Topan, you only received 1 inquiry as a result of that consultation.
That's correct. We put my personal cell number and my partner's personal cell number, and we only received 1 phone call regarding it.
Thank you. And I guess the reason why I asked the question is going through all these emails, there are a lot of questions here that I believe the developer, Mr. Topan, would be able to provide. And unfortunately, these residents in the area, I guess, have these questions that nobody has answered. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Are these going to be rental units? The environmental concern, because apparently there was 2 gas pumps. you know, they're asking about the garbage and recycling containers. Where will they be stored on the property? Is the property going to be fenced in? Will there be any type of shrubs or greenery dividing the properties for this way the residents don't see the new development? So I believe these are very simple questions in one sense, but and I'm pretty sure Mr. Topan can answer them all. So I'm just kind of surprised that all these questions are coming forward now. And I just get the impression that I don't think the neighbors are aware exactly about the development and what the developer will be doing. So maybe it's something that can be held. This way the residents are well aware. I'm not against the development. I'm just saying there's a lot of questions here that I think the residents should have the answers.
If that's required, we'd be absolutely willing to do a Zoom call or something along those lines.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilor Bruni. Council, do we have any additional comments, questions for either Mr. McConnell or developer? Councilor Gardy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Councilor Bruni bringing up some of those questions. They were posed. I was just wondering if Mr. Topan would be willing to answer a couple that Mr. Councilor Bruni mentioned. In terms of rental units, are they yes or no? And could you speak to the handling of the recycling and that on scene, and how either for you and or Mr. McConnell will whatever needs to be handled in terms of there being a former site of a service station, is that something that we need to be concerned about in the neighborhood?
So firstly, yes, they're going to be rental units. And then in regards to the garbage and recycling, that's going to be talked about further, discussed with ourselves and the planning department once we go for the site plan control stage. And that usually takes place after the zoning. And then in regards to the tanks, so we purchased this property. I think we're about the 5th owner of this property since it was originally constructed, and there's no record of tanks at any point.
Go ahead,
Mr. McConnell.
Mr. Mayor, if I could. The issue of a record of site condition, which is an analysis where you're changing from a commercial property or an industrial property to a residential property, occurs as part of the building permit stage. So if the application is successful and it is reviewed, and I believe there were tanks on that property at one time, a record of site condition may be required. Now that will be determined by the building department at the time. That is not something that is done in advance of either the zoning or the site plan agreement.
Thank you for that clarity, Mr. McConnell. Councilor Gardy?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So there wasn't an open house because of the pandemic, but a letter was sent out. That's what you mentioned, Mr. Topan, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Topan. I'm just going to say this because I heard it from dozens of people in the neighborhood. They seem to be put off a bit by a term that was used in that correspondence. Can you confirm that indeed the term gentrification was used in that letter?
Yeah, the specific quote was to gentrify our property, and that was meant in terms of the building, that the commercial property that was on the property at the time of purchasing. And there was black mold, it was boarded up. And the use of the word gentrify was in regards to that portion of the property, to have that removed and then to infill it. And actually, I guess I wrote down the definition of gentrify is by improving housing and attracting new business. And in our letter, we clearly identified that we were discussing our property only and not the neighborhood.
I appreciate that clarification because there were a lot of people who, like I said, were put off by the term thanks for explaining it in the context that you used it in the letter. And I think, that sort of discrepancy could have been avoided had a Zoom meeting been held. Through you, Mr. McConnell, or through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McConnell, in instances where there's such a post facto, there's such an outreach by the community to your department and or city council, is it practice that you may call a developer back and say, you know what, just so just as a heads up, there's a lot of pushback here, you might want to kind of schedule a meeting? Is that ever commonplace when you get the feedback as you have in this neighborhood?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Gardy. As I mentioned earlier, it is our practice to require an open house by the developer or by the applicant prior to having the application come to council, and that generally gives the applicant and city staff an opportunity to see if there is a lot of opposition and to see what those questions are. So it gives us an opportunity to answer those questions and get back to the neighbors if needed. We've been using the mail out a letter with more information sort of approach over the past year and a half. And this is the first time that this has happened, where we've had this much opposition to a development. And this, obviously, we're in regular touch with the applicant and Mr. Topan in this case. He's aware of the letters and the petitions that are coming in, most of which has only happened within the past week. As he stated, he did reach out some time ago before he even before he filed the application, I believe, to the neighbors, and only received one comment and one question, and that was, are these going to be rental or owned properties? So we were caught a little bit by surprise on that. We will take that under consideration, though, when we get this level moving forward. I think a Zoom call would be helpful. I agree.
Yeah, I think it could have very well assuage some of the concerns. Mr. Topan seems like a pretty articulate young man, I'm gonna save my questions for the other side of this. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Any other questions for planning or the developer? Councilor Vezoval.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, probably to Mr. Topan. In terms of the rental units, what is your target market for tenants, and are any going to be barrier-free?
Actually, all 5 units that we're planning to develop are planning to be barrier-free, and we're going to be attempting to receive market rents.
Okay, so in terms of completely barrier-free, they're one level, or there'll be 2 levels with stairs?
They're all slab on grade construction. It's just one level. There was a similar townhouse development that was constructed this past year on Connaught Avenue, which is in the West End as well. And it'll be a similar development to that.
And in terms of the single family dwelling, how many bedrooms is it going to be, and is that going out to open market?
Yeah, these are going to be 2-bedroom units in each unit.
Okay, but you're also doing a single family dwelling, aren't you?
No, there's actually already a single family dwelling on the property, facing second line.
Right, so is that going to get sold, or is that the person that's staying there maintaining there?
We have that rented currently, and we have them leasing for a 1-year lease right now.
So there already is a rental space unit on that property?
Correct.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Topan.
No problem.
Anything else, council? To Mr. McConnell and Mr. Topan, to follow up on Councillor Gardy's comments, when you see what I don't want to see, and what you want to avoid, I think, is doing a development that is really disruptive to the neighborhood. And I'm not suggesting this one would be. I've got a lot of confidence in Mr. Topan, although we haven't met. He's been before council before, and he's brought developments to council before, and they've always been well done. But when you see this kind of pushback in a neighborhood, I think that there's a real need to address it and engage with the neighborhood. And I think COVID has been an impasse to that. But you don't want to see the beginning of a relationship start where you have a development and you have a large kind of pushback in the neighborhood to that development. And I think a lot of the issues or concerns could frankly very likely be addressed, and particularly if the parties are acting reasonably. So, that might be something that we want to consider undertaking just to maybe improve the prospects of the development in the neighborhood and it creating kind of more cohesion in the neighborhood than disruption. I do appreciate your clarification on the gentrification comment, Mr. Topen. It was raised with me by different people that wrote to me on this issue. I think that of all the years that I've been on council, this has been one of the developments that has had the most significant pushback from residents in the neighborhood, and I've certainly received a lot of communications on that. But I respect what you're saying, and I think you used the word properly. It was just interpreted more broadly, and I'm glad to hear you say that you weren't referring to the entire neighborhood, and I want the homeowners to know that and hear that too, because it's quite often language is misunderstood. And that happens more when there aren't face-to-face communications like we're used to having pre-COVID. So thank you for that. And I was going to take the time now to go and give each of the people that are concerned, that are registered to speak in opposition, a chance to speak. Council, we won't do individual questions of those people. What we'll do is we'll hear everybody, and then if you have specific questions for a speaker, I'll give you an opportunity to ask. So I have a list in front of me, and I have a Sandra McFarling that's registered. Sandra, did you want to take the opportunity to introduce yourself and to speak against the application, if that's what your intention is?
Yes, I would. Yes, please.
Okay.
Good evening. Thank you very much, everyone. I appreciate your reiterating some of the questions that have been put forward to council regarding this application. I do appreciate the fact that the applicants did send a letter out to some of the surrounding residents. I do have a question though as to why the resident at 891 Second Line West, the Carmodys, did not receive a letter. That is the one property that is adjoining this property. This individual was concerned because he had 2 requests from real estate asking him to sell. However, he did not receive that letter from either of the applicants, as did some of the other neighbors. The neighbors did inform him later. However, with the pandemic, the stay-at-home order just being lifted on June 3rd, along with other restrictions, it made it difficult for all the residents to get the information. All those residents that would be impacted by this development. Now, to say that the location being on Second Line would be of low impact to the neighbors is just not true. This type of development and actually putting 5 units, they will be going on less than a half an acre of lot. That is a half-acre lot there at the corner with an existing single-family home already. So the 5 units would be on less than half an acre. Now, what kind of a precedent will this set for the remaining half-acre lots within this historical subdivision? As has already been noted, this subdivision was a veteran subdivision. The majority of the residents living here are children of those war veterans from the Second World War. And many of them, they were born and raised here, and when the opportunity presented itself, they bought houses in the area or they purchased the houses that they grew up in, which is exactly where I am, in the home that my husband was born and brought up in. This area is got so many large old growth trees in it. Everybody's properties are park-like. And during this time, it has never been more evident to residents as how important that is. Now, the family homes here are very modest. They're modest, they're affordable, and the properties are unlike anywhere else in the city. You can't have half-acre properties and be so close to other amenities. So bringing in multiple family units and wondering whether that will impact the remaining properties is first and foremost in property owners' minds. You've already covered some of the points that I was going to ask about. For instance, the garbage bins, recycle bins, you know, to note, should those be parked front and foremost within, you know, in front of each unit? The neighbor across the street, their back lot, that's all they're going to see is a row of gray and fluorescent green bins. Another concern here, there is one neighbor, the oldest neighbor within the neighborhood will be 100 years old next month. From her dining room window, she currently looks at a beautiful treed green space. And should this go through, that all changes. Her lot is slightly higher and will afford her the opportunity to actually see right into the units that are proposed to be built there. Right, that there will be several trees. I imagine there's 3 large trees on the south end of that property that'll have to be removed to accommodate the construction. This neighborhood was back when it was first built, very family oriented. The families back then had gardens, small animals. They shared the fruits of their hard work with one another. Children played freely in here, and that characteristic exists today in this subdivision. You can come through at any time. You see children climbing trees, children fishing at the local creeks, riding their bikes, and it's a safe environment for them. There's also the worry that with multiple rentals, that there could be a turnover. And there are negative aspects to that, people coming and going. And that is another concern of residents. The fact there is very limited parking for this number of units. Visitors would have to park on the side streets, which could pose, or not could, I'm sure it would pose a hazard for pedestrians and vehicles. Now, there's school buses that come around that corner. When the snowplow comes around that corner in the wintertime, there's large snowbanks. It's the downside of putting that many driveways that close. And then there's the other aspect, the current neighbor on the other side of the street. If you have 4 driveways on one side, should that neighbor on that large lot ever want to put access to their backyard? Will it be denied because there's far too many of them in that one area already? So this subdivision was built by our parents, our in-laws. Today you can't walk down the street and talk to one resident that doesn't have history here. And as far as having our question answered, there was more than one individual that did call. I believe I may have been the first individual to call and inquire, and I received a call back. I'm not sure if it was from you or your partner. Called me and to tell me that these were going to be high-end rentals for seniors. There was another individual that called also. Now, the confusion may lie in that we both have the same last name. But at those, and that's, I'm not aware of anybody else. I haven't heard whether anybody else did call and inquire. As far as this letter being delivered prior, we didn't realize that this was in place of, meetings where prior to the pandemic, where we would have been able to meet. And I think that meeting with the neighbors would be a very good idea. Yeah, and I did send a picture along with my letter to councilors. The original Woods Confectionery store, it clearly shows 2 gas pumps in front of that store. There were gas pumps there. Tanks were never removed from the ground back then. So and there isn't a resident in the neighborhood that's ever seen the vote. So there is going to be, I mean, there is an environmental concern from our perspective.
Yeah, Mr. McFarland, I think Mr. McConnell spoke to that, and I think he spoke to the process that would be followed.
Yes,
yeah.
I just wanted to clarify because I did understand, I did hear someone say there was never any record of tanks there.
Yeah, I think Mr. McConnell's acknowledged that, and there would be a record of site condition if the use of the site was changing, and that's a bridge that would have to be crossed.
Thank you. So as far as the neighbors, the residents of Brookfield, we all do our part in trying to preserve the character of these properties, the homes, and to preserve the memories of the veterans, the men and women that fought for us. And we feel further development in the area would also mean removing large trees. We're in close proximity to the steel mill and to another industrial site. Now, all of these trees are acting as filters to filter out the pollutants from these areas. Developing means cutting down trees. And we'll see that with that particular property. They have to remove 3 of them in order to build. So we're hoping that this application doesn't mean the beginning of the end to this gem within our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McFarland. I appreciate your representations. I think council has them now. The next individual on my list is Bart Bradley.
Come in. Can you see me good?
I'm looking for you.
Tell me if you're on my Zoom.
We thought that Mr. Bradley's on the same.
Is Mr. Bradley was with Ms. McFarland?
That's
correct.
Okay, Mr. Bradley. No, your video actually isn't on, so we couldn't see Sandra, so we can't see you, Bart. But you're welcome to speak. If you want to turn your video on, we'd be happy to see you.
You just got lucky not seeing me. There we go. Okay. My name is Bart Bradley. My mother, Flora, and I live at 194 Roosevelt Avenue. We are 2 lots away to the east of the North Eden property. My father was a Second World War Air Force veteran. He built the house in 1951. He lived and died in this house. My mother, who will be 100 in July, has lived in the house for 70 years. We are against application number A1221Z, especially the rezoning of the southern portion from single attached residential R2 zone to low density residential R3S zone. There are currently no low density R3S dwellings in the Brookfield subdivision, which is a Veterans Land Act subdivision, meaning single detached dwelling only. I spoke with Jonathan Kirkell, a city planner, and he said that because of the northern position of the North Eden project, that it would not really impinge on the Brookfield subdivision. I wondered how having 6 houses on less than a 1/2 acre lot, how that wouldn't impinge on a single detached neighborhood. I wondered if this would just be the start of multi-dwelling projects coming from all directions, east, west, south, all points of the compass. My next concern was with the population density of the project. I talked to the planning and building department on how many people would be allowed into these townhouses. They really had no firm idea because it was under the term family. My question is, are we going to have 5 rented townhouses with unlimited people coming and going? What about pets? Is there going to be no pets allowed policy? Is the neighborhood going to see not only unlimited people, but pets as well? If this project goes through and 6 houses go on that property, as opposed to a single dwelling, it will disrupt the neighborhood. With renters coming and going, the peaceful, quiet, and older neighborhood will never be the same. Finally, if this project goes through, my perception of Sault Ste. Marie will change. the vast majority of the neighborhood is against this application. So it is a question of democracy and the wishes of the people, or is it about commercial rate tax money and the influence of real estate developers? I will not move right away. I will take care of my super senior mother, but when she passes on, perhaps I will pass on Sault Ste. Marie and just be another person leaving Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you for your submissions. Next on my list is Darlene McFarling. Could I assume, Sandra, that Darlene would be with you too?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Darlene, you're
Yes.
welcome to.
Thank you for having us on to express our thoughts about this. Everything that Sandra has said, I concur with everything she has said. I am the wife of a veteran, and my son's in the Canadian Armed Forces. And
Sandra, let me interrupt you just for a second. I'm finding it hard to hear you, so I'm going to assume that my colleagues are finding it hard to hear you. So I'm just going to ask you to speak up so we can all hear what you have to say. Thank you.
I said I am the wife of a veteran, the daughter-in-law of a veteran, and my son is in the Canadian Armed Forces. I would just hate to see anything happen to this property.
Okay. Was that the go? Sorry, darling.
That's okay. Everything that Sandra had said, I concur with her.
Okay. Did you want to add anything further?
I think we did it all in her letter. There's nothing else I want to add to that.
Yeah. I do know the council does have at its disposal all of the communications that were sent to us. Okay. Thank you, darling.
Thank you.
The next party on my list is Lori Bolduc. Is Lori available to us tonight, Madam Clerk?
Unless she signed on at home, she's not with us here.
Oh, Lori's with you there?
No.
Oh, okay. Is
She'll
Lori
get
signed on independently, Madam Clerk?
Perhaps.
Mr. Mayor, I can give you a little background. Ms. Bolduc reached out to me and wanted to pass along to Ms. Tazinski that she will not be joining us. Something came up.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. That's confirmed. So then I have a Renee Lemke. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yes, you did. Do you hear me?
Yeah. Welcome to. We can hear you and see you. Welcome to council. The floor is yours, and you feel free to make your representations.
Okay, I'm totally opposed to this project. We've been living on North Eden, raised our family for 36 years. The properties are absolutely beautiful, half-acre properties. Like Mrs. McFarlane said, they're park light settings. We never had to worry about our children. I did mention in my letter, I was in a serious car accident on the corner of Second Line and North Eden back in '89. Second Line is extremely busy as it is. Okay, I don't even turn onto North Eden from Second Line anymore. I go the other way down Gooley Avenue and up the back way because that's how busy Second Line is at all times. It's showing in the plans that there are 5 rental units, parking spots for 4. Where is the other parking spot going for the 5th unit? And where are visitors going to park?
Did you want someone to address parking now, Ms. Lemke, or did you want to wait till you were done?
I think I could get somebody to address that now.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll ask if Mr. McConnell will make some comments, and if the applicant has any additional comments, we'll get them from him. But Mr. McConnell, Ms. Lemke raises an issue with respect to the volume and amount of parking available to these units. Do you have any perspective on that you could share?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The bylaw only requires 1 parking space per unit or 5 units. Renee is quite correct when she says there's 4 driveways, but each of those driveways is a double wide driveway. So with 4 driveways, we have parking for 8 units. And for visitor parking, there is sufficient room behind the first car for a second vehicle to park and not be on the traveled portion of the roadway. I know stacked parking is not an ideal situation, but there will be 8 parking spaces that can be dedicated to the tenants of the building. Mr. Topan may have something else to add to that.
Mr. Topan, did you want to make a comment?
No, that's correct, what Mr. McConnell has stated.
Okay, I have another question then. These are available for families to rent. So most families have 2 vehicles. So you've got 5 units, that's 10 vehicles, and really no place for visitors, which means they're going to be parking at the corner of North Eden Street or Roosevelt. You're coming on to North Eden Street from Second Line with a whole bunch of cars there, and the traffic at Second Line, I just can't see it. I don't ever want to see it. I'm very upset about this. I don't think it's feasible. All this on a half-acre property with a single dwelling there as well. There's like Mrs. McFarlane said, there's snow removal. What's going to happen with all these cars on the street with snow removal? I just can't understand how this could even be thought of the way it is.
Was that the extent of your submissions, Ms. Lemke?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McConnell, before we move on, I think there's, a consistent theme here about the size of the development relative to the size of the property and how having the property, I think in the opinions of the objectors, overdeveloped could affect the neighborhood. Did planning consider that throughout this process?
Yes, we did, Mr. Mayor, and there's no doubt that this is a significant development when you give the nature of the remainder of the subdivision, the remainder of the area, which are very large lots. We have gone through a technical exercise. We've looked at that. We've talked to engineering. We've talked to traffic. They do not believe, they did not identify any concerns with an additional 5 units in the area. They did not identify any traffic concerns. I do appreciate that, that there will be a development there where right now it's a grassed field. With regards to landscaping as a condition of approval, as a condition of the site plan approval, Mr. Topan will be providing us with a landscape plan. With regards to some of the larger trees that were identified by Ms. McFarlane, they may be on city property. We're going to confirm that, and the designer of the landscape plan will be able to confirm the condition of those trees. We will be taking into account views from other areas, and there will be a fence put up along the easterly side of the property. And as is our practice, we will consult with the immediate neighbor on the details of that fencing. So we have gone through an exercise which looks at a lot of different variables. It is being recommended. This is consistent not only with the city's official plan, but with provincial policy with regards to infill development and increasing densities. So hence the recommendation from all staff, which is to approve this development. I'd be happy to answer any of the questions on that.
Okay, so Council, we've heard from all the objectors. Thank you very much, Mr. Lemke. Do you have anything further before I move on?
Actually, I have one other thing.
You kind of tell the way go ahead.
I know. It's just there's so much going on in my head right now, but I'm thinking of people coming and going, okay, in and out of the rental units, which usually does happen. What is bothering me is theft in the neighborhood, riffraff in the neighborhood, which we've never had to worry about. And I know that this will happen. People will be coming and going. We've had people, the turnover in this neighborhood is hardly anything. Like, not very often do you find houses for sale in this neighborhood. So I feel that with all these units at the corner, there's kids on bikes, there's pets. I don't know what they've said about Second Line, but Second Line is dangerous on each of those corners turning onto these streets at the best of times. I couldn't imagine a unit with all that parking there and people coming off a second line. I just couldn't, or even turning onto second line once all these units are in place, especially in the winter.
Thank you, Ms. Lemke. I saw Mr. McConnell motion, so I'll go back to him before we move on to council for any questions on the remainder of the application or any of the parties that are objecting. Mr. McConnell, did you want to speak to those last comments?
Just one, Mr. Mayor. I know you're well aware of the situation. I would just like to remind council through zoning can control the use of the land. They can control where the buildings are going to go, the height of the buildings, the size of the buildings, landscaping, those kind of physical features. Council cannot what is generally called people zone, which is you cannot control who lives there. And you can't be making decisions based on the fact that really nice people might live there or people who aren't so nice might live there. That is just not something that is within council's authority to do. So council needs to make their decision tonight based on the proposed use of the land, which is to retain the existing single family home up on second line and construct 5 new townhouses with frontage on North Eden.
Thank you, Mr. McConnell. The parties that were registered to speak in opposition have all had an opportunity to speak now. Council, did you have any further questions? I think Councillor Hollingsworth is on my list, and then we'll go to any Councillor Vezawa. So Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. It's my understanding in the past being on council, we've had other townhouses that were proposed and eventually were built in something similar. There's many concerns from different residents in the neighborhood. I remember Simpson Street, and I do remember the developer at that time engaging with the neighbors. So my question to Mr. Toppin, if I may.
Go ahead. Yeah, you can ask the applicant a question for sure.
Thank you. It sounds like, from my understanding, you have sent out letters to the different, I guess, neighbors, and you did include your cell phone number, from my understanding, which is good. And it's my understanding that you did receive maybe one or a few comments. At this time, would you be open to maybe delaying this by 1 month so that now with the lockdown measures being lessened, would you be open to delaying it by 1 month so that you can maybe address more of these issues that were brought to our attention tonight or over the last few days? So potentially maybe you can have some face-to-face meetings with these individuals to build up that neighborhood relationship?
Well, ideally, we wouldn't like to delay that because we would like to begin construction before the end of this year. But we definitely are open to a Zoom call at any point in time, or face-to-face, whatever would be required. But I wouldn't like to delay it if possible.
Okay, and one last question. Would you be open to just delaying until the next council meeting by chance, which is not a month? So you could, again, reach out with the Zoom call suggestion?
If that is required, we would be open to it. But again, we would like to proceed accordingly.
Mr. Topin, it's your application and it's here. So if you want a decision on it tonight, it's in front of council.
I'd like a decision on it tonight.
Yeah,
please.
If you're agreeable, as Councillor Holmes was suggesting, to put it to the next meeting, we can certainly kind of arrange that. But if you're looking to have it decided tonight, then we can proceed and get you your decision.
I would like to have it decided tonight.
Okay. Councillor Hollingsworth, do you have anything further?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Vezawa.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Just one comment and one question. I just wanted to comment to, I think it was Ms. McFarling was talking about the Veterans Land Act. That was terminated in 1977. And it was brought forth after the Second World War to provide low interest loans and down payments for servicemen to buy property. So You made a comment about the properties being part of the Veterans Land Act. So, I mean, it was pretty wonderful that veterans could purchase them, but it was terminated in 1977. So I just wanted to give you that information. And further to the concerns about who would be renting and people coming in and out. So Mr. Topan, I'm assuming because these are only going to be 2-bedroom units, they're going to be barrier free, and they're going to be a single level, that you're anticipating probably empty nesters that are getting out of their own larger homes and wanting to downsize. Would that be correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's consistent with a lot of the other townhouse developments that are occurring in the West End.
And I know you said market rent, but could you give us an estimate of that market rent, just so that people have some idea as to what it would cost to live in these townhomes?
I would say probably in between. It's going to be rough figures just with rising construction costs right now, but between $1,200 and $1,600.
So $1,200 to $1,600 a month plus utilities, I'm assuming, because everyone will have their own meters.
Correct.
So it'd be about $2,000 a month, roughly, to probably maintain one of these townhomes for someone.
Roughly, for sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Topin.
Thank you.
Is that then next on my list? I have Councillor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to actually Mr. McConnell, I have a question in regards to this proposal and how it is laid out similar to one that we had a couple months back. There was one that came through to us that was a 6-unit that the city staff had asked for it to be split into 2 3s to preserve green space. Why wasn't that done? I appreciate that this is a 5-unit, but why wasn't that a consideration for this particular project?
We did look at the possibility of reducing the number of units, but in this particular case, when compared to the other one had virtually no rear yards at all. So there was no landscape space provided. When you look at the design that's before council tonight, there's a considerable landscape space directly behind each unit. And the applicant is proposing to construct an overhead canopy so that people would get better use of that space. We always look at that question as, is there livable outdoor space that's available to, if not each unit, as many units as possible. And in this particular case, each unit will have its own dedicated landscape space outside.
Okay, that was my only remaining question on this item. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no one else on my list here. Oh, sorry, I have Councillor for questions. Yeah, I was going for questions, not comments, Councillor Shoemaker. So questions, Councillor Dufour, and then Councillor Gardner, you've asked questions, so I'll come back. I see your finger.
I'm sorry, Mr. Provenzano. I only had a comment.
Okay. Councillor Gardner, you had a further question?
Yeah, could I speak to either Ms. Lemke or Sandra McFarland? Could I ask a question of those opposed, Mr.
Sure.
Mayor?
Yeah.
So through you to Mrs. Lemke, Ms. Lemke, is there a number of units that, had it come before council, you would be cool with, or is 5 like the number? If they were developing a duplex, would your concerns be the exact same?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Lemke. Council, so we do I have any, before we get to comments, do I have any questions left from anybody? I see none. So we're gonna make a decision on this tonight. So I'll give councilors an opportunity to offer some context and comments on their decision or their vote before we call the vote. So Councillor Dufour, you wanted to make a comment, so I'm going to start with you. I saw Councillor Shoemaker, and then Councillor Scott, and then we'll keep on going. Councillor Dufour, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to take this opportunity to congratulate Mr. Toppin and his partner, and to thank them for bringing this development before council. I think that, when you look around the city, and this is by no means unique to Sault Ste. Marie, we have an affordability crisis, and it's an affordability crisis that's been created by a lack of supply in our housing market, and by bringing forward applications to densify areas of property that are appropriate to fit more units on them, to create more housing supply. We're making housing more affordable. We're obviously beautifying what is right now a vacant lot. And I just want to offer my encouragement, my thanks to these particular developers and to others as well. It's really important that we continue to approve and support these kinds of applications so that they can get started. There's an awful lot to the development process that Mr. McConnell and his planning department oversees. Ways for these legitimate and valid concerns to be adequately addressed in ways that are appropriate and compliant with all relevant legislation. So, Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to support this application, and Mr. Toppin, I wish you all the best with your development. Thanks for bringing this forward. Thanks,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Thank you, Councilor Dufour. Councilor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think Councilor Gardy was getting to the same point I intend to make with his questioning, but I went back and looked at the October 24th, 2016 council agenda, which is the last time this property was before council. And as we heard Mr. McConnell say to us tonight, that was a proposal to develop 2 individual units on the large lot that is vacant here. And at least 5 of the parties in opposition back in 2016 to 2 units are in opposition today to 5 units. So while I can appreciate the appeal of having a vacant property next to you or around you that has nice mature trees in it, that cannot be an impediment to approving developments in our community. It appears obvious to me that no matter what was proposed for this lot, there will be community opposition in the neighborhood, in the immediate vicinity. But this is, as recommended by planning, something that is within good planning principles for this property, fits the site, and is recommended. And as Councillor Dufour says, we need to intensify uses in underdeveloped areas on vacant property, which is within existing residential neighborhoods, rather than building on the periphery of the municipality and extending the boundary here, there, and everywhere. So I support this, and I wish the developers good luck in their venture.
Thank you, Councilor Shoemaker. Councilor Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you were pointing out earlier, this is probably one of the larger times or larger outpourings of opposition that we've received, at least in my time on council. I have actually started receiving opposition to this particular application late May. So it's not like these concerns were just coming up. These concerns have been expressed for several weeks, at least for myself, and I believe Councillor Gardy was on the emails as well. As I've always been open to saying in the public, I try to be as best a voice as I can for people in our particular ward, and I think that in this particular case, it's the support, the outpouring of opposition has been obvious to myself, and I do appreciate what the developers are going for, but in this particular time, I think that I'm going to have to represent the people of that area and vote in opposition to it. Thank you.
Okay, Council, any other comments? Councilor Van Dyke, Councilor Gardy.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any doubt as to the ability of Mr. Topan and his partner to develop things in a responsible way and things that would be aesthetically pleasing. I wish him all the luck in the world moving forward. That being said, I'm elected to represent constituents, and oftentimes I'll take both sides of things and listen to them and come to my own conclusion. That being said, in this instance, I've had dozens, literally, of communications about this. They are adamantly opposed in the area. I think there's something to be said to maintaining the integrity of this neighborhood. I think if anybody spent any time in it, they would know that it is pretty unique as it relates to the rest of Sault Ste. Marie, the size of the properties, all of the reasons that were stated by those in opposition. I wish Mr. Topan the best of luck in future endeavors. Unfortunately, due to the outcry of those who live in the immediate vicinity, I'm going to be voting against it.
Council, do we have any other comments before we vote? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. I just want to again say to those that have come to council tonight that live in the neighborhood, thank you for taking the time to emailing us, to writing letters, and to be here to verbally outline your concerns. That's what our community is about. So I want to say thank you. And also to you, Mr. Topan, I cannot thank you enough as well to take on this development. And we do need townhouses, and many comments about empty nesters. And I know that you're going to design something beautifully. I honestly wish that we would delay just for 2 weeks, because I think that just sitting down now that lockdown measures are changing and having more of an open conversation with the neighborhood would do everyone some really good. I wish you would consider it. Again, I think what you're doing is excellent, but getting to know your neighbors and really be an active listener, which I know you have been. And I just think there is some good solutions here, and you are on the right path. But again, thank you to all of you for coming to council. It does take a lot of effort, so thank you.
Councillor Hollingsworth, any other comments, council? So before we vote, I'm just going to add, some comments, particularly to the people that are participating as objectors tonight. I heard a couple of things that I just wanted to address, and one of them was that this is a matter of democracy, and there would be a disenfranchisement if this passed, where you felt like you might want to move or leave the community. And I want to say I'm sorry to hear that, and I think I need to point out one important dynamic to this. When we hear planning applications, we always do it at 5:30, and we sit under the Planning Act, and we are mayor and council, we are elected, and it is important that we listen to the concerns and understand them, make a decision taking into consideration those concerns. But when it comes to planning matters, we have to make decisions based on planning principles. And if we don't make decisions based on planning principles, the applicants or the opponents can go to the next stage and appeal our decisions. And if they weren't found to be made on planning principles, the decisions are very susceptible to appeal. So while we do sit as a democratic body, when we sit under the Planning Act, we're sitting in a bit of a different capacity. So if this application passes, I don't want you to feel disenfranchised and not heard. I can tell you that you were obviously heard by your ward councillors, and I heard you too. And I read all of the communications, and I thought a lot about what everybody said. And Mr. McConnell, I'll say I think we really have to get away from the practice of not doing a virtual or personal engagement, or encouraging or requiring the developers to do that, because I think that really can help move these projects along. And I think of a number of projects. I think of the Garden Street project, which was a duplex, and the neighborhood was opposed to that, and it passed, and I voted in favor of it. And I think of the Simpson Street project that Councillor Hollingsworth referred to earlier, which was multi-residential units. There were a number of units, and there were some similar concerns about it being a very historic neighborhood. It was an old neighborhood in the community, and that it would change the quality of the neighborhood. And there was opposition to it. The developer got it approved, developed really nice units, and I've spoken to some of the neighbors since then who actually think the units are very nice, and it was nice to not have vacant land there in the end. So I understand your concerns. I heard them. For my part, I have to focus on considering planning principles and considering decisions that I participated in the past, and make sure that the decisions that I make from time and again are consistent with one another. So I wanted to let you know that before we cast our vote. So, Madam Clerk, do we have the resolution read?
I have not yet read the motion.
Yeah,
it's a motion by Councillors Christian and Councillor Gardy. Did you want somebody else to second the motion?
Yeah, we'll have Councillor Shoemaker instead of Councillor Gardy second the motion.
Resolved that the report of the planner dated June 14, 2021, concerning rezoning application A1221Z be received, and that council rezone the northerly 26 meters at 899 second line west from general commercial zone C4 to single detached residential zone R2, and rezone the remaining southerly 49 meters from single detached residential zone R2 to low density residential zone R3S, with the following special exceptions for a multiple attached dwelling only. 1, reduce the rear south yard setback from 10 meters to 6 meters. 2, permit parking in an exterior side west yard. 3, permit canopies to project 4 meters into the interior side east yard, and that the subject property be deemed as an area of site plan control as per section 41 of the Planning Act, and that the legal department be requested to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect the same.
Okay, council, so the votes on your screen, all in favor of the application? Opposed to the application? The application carries 9-2.
So that will take us back to Mr. McDonald's presentation.
Welcome back, Mr. McDonald. Maybe for continuity purposes, you could start at the beginning of the last slide you were on. So do that slide again, and then we can move forward. Yeah, I think that was the one. Was that the slide?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize for not getting through my presentation prior to planning, as was the intent. I'll try to proceed here with a little bit more diligence.
You're the only thing left on our agenda at this stage, Mr. McDonald. So I don't want you to feel rushed.
Okay. As I'd indicated before, as part of this the study, the staff has reviewed the transit routes with the intention of ensuring the maximum coverage is maintained through downtown, specifically in the area of the Dennis Street and Queen Street intersections. Additional stops are being reviewed and added as necessary, with the goal of no decrease in service levels. A key point which I want to draw everybody's attention to is the Sioux College transfer point that was launched on May 3rd, 2021. The intended effect of this transfer hub is to provide transit users, or 5 of 7 routes, with an alternate location to transfer routes without the need to travel downtown. This is intended to have the effect of reducing trip duration and increasing convenience for transit users. As a result of the implementation of the Sioux College Transfer Hub, it's anticipated a decrease in ridership in the downtown terminal can be expected. Per the ridership survey that we conducted as part of the study, nearly 40% of transit users' destination is not in the downtown area. Now, we recognize that this does not imply that the downtown terminal will see a reduction of 40% of users transferring there. The reduction in transit users transferring routes at the downtown hub, regardless of location, we can't ascertain without further ridership data. And this Transit's proposed implementation of a passenger counting system, which could collect this user data, such as trip start and end durations, trip duration, destination, etc. The city could use this data to analyze and improve routes, stop locations, and continuously monitor the usage statistics and adjust as needed to adapt to these changes in the usage patterns. We anticipate that the Sioux College transfer point could have the effect of reducing users traveling to downtown. We are very cognizant of riders and users of the transit system are destination oriented. They have a destination in mind, and that is where they're going. It's not just as a go downtown or a go uptown for the sake of that ride when their destination is somewhere else. Next slide, please. The final key consideration that we come to is the life cycle costs. The Dent Street terminal has an annual operating budget of just over $110,000 a year, of which the security and maintenance costs account for roughly $90,000 or just shy of $90,000. The existing terminal will require an additional $377,000 in maintenance and repairs over the next 5 years. These are 2020 costs, and I do always throw the caveat in there due to COVID pricing. We do see some wide variances and fluctuations in building material costs right now. This equates to a total of $671,000 required to renovate the existing building, including the new roof and the HVAC system, which would have to be upgraded to improve the accessibility, washroom facilities, and security. These costs would be eligible for the ISIP funding, which is 73 cents on the dollar. In comparison, 111 Huron Street, for an initial capital cost of $2 million, again, 73% could be recovered through the funding program. Annual operating costs of the city would reduce by approximately $105,000 a year, with an additional $66,000 per year savings in reduction of fuel and man-hour costs due to deadheading. There would be negligible increases in maintenance costs for the existing facility. This would represent less than a 5-year payback return in order to relocate the facility. And then thereafter, it would be a net $100,000 savings to the city. And this does include the ISIP funding consideration. Next slide, please. Prior to me getting into the environmental mitigation recommendations, I want to speak to our public outreach campaign and our public consultation. As I indicated before, as a part of a Schedule A+ and Schedule A environmental assessment, the city has the duty to notify the public of a project. Based on our consultation plan developed with the city's Sault Ste. Marie staff, we've exceeded that, and we planned this project more in accordance with the Schedule B or Schedule C public outreach campaign. For instance, was the initial advertisement study commencement, which was published on City of Sault Ste. Marie websites, local news organizations, as well as a direct mailing. There was 2 public information centers or Zoom calls. Unfortunately, it was we were in lockdown at the time. We could not hold the standard face-to-face presentations, which we typically do at City Hall. But the 2 public information centers were attended well. We had 81 total attendees. There was also notices of the proposed with contact information of myself and city staff. If people had any questions or concerns that they could reach out to us, these were published and provided on every single city bus, and also posted in the terminal. Coming out of meetings with public stakeholders and discussions with concerned members of the public, we did identify a data gap, which we had is we did not adequately survey the actual users of the transit system at the time. As such, we actually went back and we surveyed the actual transit users. We put somebody at the bus terminal and collected data that way. Based on all the outreach campaign, we did hold separate meetings with public stakeholders, for example, the Downtown Association, as well as persons with concerns. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Sapa, if you could return to the previous slide. I didn't speak to the actual slide. So based on the concerns that were identified through our studies and through members of the public and associations, there was concerns identified. We then undertook the task of what can we do to mitigate these concerns to the greatest extent possible. One of the things that we identified through the survey is that actual users were not aware of the upcoming opening of the northern transfer point and the effects that that would have on reducing their trip times and convenience. The second was maximize the number or maintain the existing butt routes to the greatest extent in the immediate area of the existing Dennis Street terminal. Again, to ensure that service levels were maintained at the maximum level that we could. This was an exercise that city staff undertook. There was concerns with the repurposing or what would happen with the existing terminal site. This, again, was a recommendation of ours, is to initiate this study to ensure that a good proper use, should the terminal be moved to 111 Huron Street, what to do with the existing site. Bearing in mind, 2/3 of the existing site is dedicated to parking to the GFL Center. So we are somewhat limited to the south and east face of the building and the building itself. Recognizing that actual trip destination or ridership info, the data was not there, was to install the passenger counters. I believe, and Mr. Laming can correct me when he speaks after, that I believe this was actually an intent for the city to implement before the study, regardless. So that is something that we would continue to recommend. Next study, please. The second would be to install a bus shelter on Queen Street adjacent to the existing terminal. This is to ensure that since 5 of the 7 routes are still intended to be maintained past this intersection, is to install a sheltered bus stop here. The Sioux Greyhound organization expressed concern about the patrons to the Sioux Greyhound games and the ability to wait for a bus, or a warm area to wait for the bus during the winter months and typical hockey season. The solution was that or a mitigated solution would be to extend the lobby hours after the game to allow patrons to wait within that heated area. A detailed review of the bus stops along Queen Street west of Bruce Street and relocate as deemed appropriate to maintain service levels. There was a number of, well, I shouldn't say number, there was one business in particular that requested a bus stop in front of their establishment. A second business owner to the south of 111 Huron Street did raise the concern of noise that the bus terminal, or a move of the bus terminal, could present. This was a legitimate concern. A mitigation measure that we could implement is a sound attenuation barrier or fence. One of the mitigation measures that we actually looked at as well for the existing bus site, based on a concerned citizen that was in favor of relocation, was a similar type of mitigation measure to attenuate sound in that residential area adjacent to the existing site. And the last is continue to advance the possibility of switching to electric bus fleet to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This would also have the benefit of reducing noise to the properties south of 111 Huron Street as well. Next slide, please. When we compared the alternatives, again, alternative 1 does not fit the bill, as it does not address the problem or opportunity. That's the do nothing. The second would be the integrated facility, or the 111 Huron Street facility. And the third would be the stay and upgrade the Dennis Street. The integrated facility at 111 is preferred on the economic environment. is preferred from a security and facility oversight and attention to safety. Operations functionality, again, 111 Huron Street is the preferred thing. The road network, with the Huron Street being located on a arterial road, it is there's much more capacity than the Queen Street road network. Air emissions is also preferred due to the reduction in greenhouse gases and the less deadheading time, reduction in fuel. And same with the noise, it moves the terminal out of a highly dense residential area to a something much more commercial and spread out. I do note that the transit service levels, and I apologize, this might be somewhat of a misnomer to people. The service levels will be maintained at the existing site or at the new site. But I want to speak more to the social economic considerations, the vibrancy of downtown, and the impact that a potential move could have. Some could argue that a reduction in the ridership downtown due to the Sioux College hub would not necessarily have an impact on the local businesses. The reason being that the downtown is not the destination of the transit user, and there is thus no original reason or desire to patronage the downtown business or amenities. However, the social economic influence that the downtown exerts on a person's decision on where to regularly shop or do business because of the convenience of downtown concentrated area of shopping and amenities cannot be established with any degree of certainty. That puts us in the social vibrancy of downtown is we cannot ascertain what impact that the move would have. And for that, the preferred for transit service levels or the social economic influence would stay with the stay and upgrade option. Another thing that's never made it onto the alternative comparison is the future electrical charging infrastructure. Should the city switch to the electric bus fleet, due to the space constraints and the size restraints and the operational constraints of the existing density terminal, the power would, I believe, would be there. However, the actual infrastructure would not be able to be located there just due to the size. So any charging infrastructure would be required at 111 Huron Street, and that could create logistical operational issues. Next slide, please. Presented in front of you is a proposed preliminary terminal layout. As you note, buses would enter through the north driveway along Huron Street, would pull up along the sidewalk. Patrons wishing to go inside to use the washroom or any amenities that could be located in there would do so in the light blue area. And this is the area of the existing administration offices. This would require renovation, and some of the administration area would be moved to the green area shown. The site would be and can be designed as AODA compliant. As you would note, any pedestrian traffic has the ability to, coming from the north, use the sidewalk to gain access to the light blue. This minimizes pedestrian conflict areas and actually minimizes vehicular conflict areas too, with Queen Street and the traffic volumes and number of lanes and traffic patterns on such. Buses would then exit and have the option of going north on Huron Street or east on Bay Street to continue with their routes. Next slide, please. With that, this concludes my presentation. I thank everybody for sitting through what I have a tendency of make the most interesting subject matters dry and dull. So I appreciate your time. There is, thank you to Mr. Lamming. The comprehensive report is included within your council package. And I believe Mr. Lamming's report is there as well.
Thank you, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Lamming, did you have anything you were looking to present or add before we take questions from council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, Mr. McDonald's done a thorough job of capturing everything, and so we'd be happy to take questions at this time.
Okay, I have a list going. Councillor Nero and Councillor Shoemaker both indicated questions, and I have Councillor Bezowan. I'll add now. Councillor Bruni. Councillor Nero, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My first question is to, I guess, Mr. Lamming. Mr. Lamming, the Dennis Street parking lot right now at the present terminal site, how is there any way that we can change that? I mean, there's an agreement that's there because of the GFL. Is there anything that can be done to reduce the parking required there?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, as Mr. McDonald stated, there's 70 spaces there for general parking and 2 accessible spaces. We would have to bring that to council to make any adjustment. I'd probably defer this to the planning director, Don McConnell, to provide some advice on that matter.
Okay.
Mr. McConnell, did you catch the question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When we rebuilt the Memorial Gardens with a major expansion, the zoning bylaw requires that we only had to provide sufficient additional parking to provide for the additional seating that was being created. And the idea behind this approach is that what it means is that we're not going to make a situation worse, possibly make it better, not make it worse. And to accommodate that, there was the small lot constructed on Bruce Street, as well as we use some of the parking around the Dennis Street terminal. Everyone seemed to be in agreement at the time, but that's actually a zoning bylaw requirement. So to reduce that parking, we have to either find parking someplace else or reduce the parking through a variance to the total number of required parking spaces.
But so to confirm, the variance process would work in this instance.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, yes, that's the process. That's the legal process we would have to go through to reduce the amount of parking in total for the gardens.
Great, thank you, Mr. McConnell. Mr. Lamming, my understanding, of course, that the ISIP is available for the Huron Street location. Through the EA, I saw that if we were to upgrade the present terminal at Dennis Street, that ISIP funds would be available. I would assume that if we would look at a new building on the present site, that ISIP funds would also be available.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, the process would be a change order process request through to ISIP, be a change of scope of project. If you were to change from the relocation to Huron to Dennis Street, you would have to either change through reconfiguration of existing space, or for a new building, it would have to get approved through that process.
Okay, and what kind of timelines are we looking at that, if that were to happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, if that's the will of council, we would have to put a request into ISIP and then wait back for their announcement if that would be approved. So we would expedite that as soon as we could.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lamming, for that. My final question, Mr. Lamming, is have we ever considered I know that we haven't on this council and previous council, but has it ever been considered on putting a new building on the present Dennis Street site?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Nero, I'm not aware of a new build being explored. We did go back quite a ways in the records of the studies going back to having this a recommendation from the Transit Consulting Network, a formal report from Public Works, but I'm not aware of a new build at this site.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lamming. Mr. Mayor, those are basically my questions. I have a comment, and basically it's based on page 3 of the EA, which basically says that the Dennis Street bus terminal is in the prime location, downtown location, from the perspective of being central to transit customers, downtown destinations, and residential development. So I really believe that, based on the fact that on the new build right now, that we really don't have enough information to go ahead tonight. As far as I'm concerned, this is my opinion. I would certainly like to refer this back to staff and bring back a report on the possibility of a new build at the present location. It would be a referral that I'm moving. I mean, I visited the site today again. I know the site very well, but if there were some changes that could be made with the parking requirements for the GFL that are on that site, I really believe that there's a chance that the new building could be built on that site, even leaving the existing building up during the build, so that we wouldn't have to disrupt our transit routes, severely. Certainly, there would be some impact to operations. But those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. I just don't think at this point to set it to an RFP to look at design work. I think it's a little bit premature in my mind. I think that we should explore the new build at the present site before we get to that.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, Councillor Nero, you would want staff to return with a report to indicate what a new build would look like at that site, and to give you some sense of what the potential cost of that would be. So the feasibility of a new build on that site, considering the restrictions on the site, and the potential cost of a new build on that site.
That's correct.
That's
correct. And we would be able to compare that with the EA findings for the Huron Street location, with the cost that's shown there.
And make the decision that's before us today in the context of having that additional information.
Correct.
So so the Councillor Nero is moving that.
I believe Councillor Bruni indicated that he would second, but you have to check.
He just put his hand up. Councillor Bruni, was that to indicate you had a seconder? Okay, so Council, before we move forward discussing the referral motion, I just want to check with staff. So I'm going to ask the CEO to maybe he's not on my screen here. But yeah, so I'm going to ask the CEO just to offer comment in two respects. One is the substance of the referral motion clear to you, and two is what kind of timelines do you think you could return that to council with?
Through you to Mr. Mayor and Council, what I've heard is that the motion would be a referral to staff for information on what a new build at the Dennis Street site would look like, and whether it was feasible given the constraints of that site. We'd have to examine that. And in general, what a cost figure for that would be, to the same level of detail as the EA has provided for the Huron Street site.
That's my understanding, Mr. CEO.
Okay. If we're looking at that, I will ask Mr. Lamming and Mr. Ver. Certainly, it's not a 2-week turnaround.
No.
But whether they feel they would be able to get that information back by either the July or the August meeting.
Mr. Ver, you're present.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Council. I believe that we could shoot for the July meeting and try and have something back to Council in the July timeframe.
Mr. Lamming, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Mr. Mayor, no, the instructions are clear.
Council, so what's before us now then is a referral motion for additional information that relates to the staying at the Dennis Street site, and what it would look like if a new build was built on the Dennis Street site. So that's what we're currently discussing. Questions or comments on that motion, Councillor Gardy?
Yeah, forgive me if I don't fully follow here, but this motion, would it be to explore a new build that would be just a terminal on that site, or it would encompass everything that we're looking at here?
No, it would be a terminal.
Thanks.
I'm correct in that respect. Am I not, Mr. Councillor Nero? You're not suggesting that the build of the bus barns and the whole transit facility on that site?
No, I am referring to certainly just the transit building itself as it is in process today, as it works today.
Yeah. Councillor Christian?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would support the referral, but I have a question, and perhaps Mr. Ver or Mr. Lamming can answer it. In reading the documentation, ISIP, according to the report, the city essentially would be responsible for 26% of a new build. Is that correct? And then the other levels of government would pick up the remainder.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, that is correct.
Okay, so in line and in keeping with Councillor Nero's referral motion, is there a way, or when we cost this, do we look at refurbishing, or would it be a complete new build? Because according to this document, it says that if it's a refurbishment or a remodeling, the city's only responsible for 17% under ISIP. Is that correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we would have to confirm that with ISIP if they would allow that to take place if we were to refurbish Dennis Street. And to your point, we would have to cost that out further, but we could be looking in the neighborhood of a refurbishment of the space in the neighborhood of $1 million. But a new build, obviously, we would have to look further to see what that would cost, and that would be north of that figure.
Okay. I certainly don't want to add to the workload of staff, but I just throw that out there as a topic and something to consider. Thank you.
Okay, any other, Councillor Dufour? And then Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, just a question on the referral motion, Mr. Mayor. Would the, if approved to be forthcoming staff report be inclusive of all future operational considerations between the two sites? I just think that if we're getting a cost construction estimate and trying to do an apples to apples comparison, it's important that we don't just compare capital costs, but also look at the long-term operational savings slash implications between coalescing services under one location and keeping them split. I'd really like that detailed information to be in there as well.
So Councillor Nero, do you feel like that's consistent with the motion, the request you're making here?
Absolutely. If we're looking at costs, we have to look at the total cost.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, Councillor Shoemaker. And then Councillor Bezo-Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess in the absence of the opportunity to propose something a bit more outside of the parameters of the city's current assets and what Councillor Nero is proposing, I'd be looking, I've always thought that the existing dentistry terminal obviously is beyond its useful life, but I don't know if we should limit ourselves to looking only at it as an alternative. I think of the vacant property in the Station Mall parking lot, the old ACR train station. Now I realize we don't own that, so there's a limiting factor there. But it seems to me that if we were looking at options for rebuilding a new transit terminal versus using an existing building that could be refurbished, that would be a good place to look, because it checks a lot of the boxes that I think would satisfy many of the folks who have written to us in opposition to the move to Huron Street. So I don't believe that Councillor Nero's motion is broad enough to capture something along those lines. But I guess I struggle to understand whether alternatives were looked at. I understood from Mr. John McDonald's presentation that he was asked by city staff to examine whether there could be a move to Huron Street, not as we do in most EAs, come up with what the problem is, develop a long list of proposals and then find a preferred alternative versus what I understood him to say was he was asked to determine whether or not the Huron Street location would work for a new terminal. So I would actually like to take it further back than where Councillor Nero's talking about and come up with a list of all the potential options and come up with a preferred alternative to the existing problem, which is the need for either revitalization or upgrade of the transit terminal altogether. So I don't know if Mr. McDonald has anything to add to my understanding of what he was saying, but that's what I understood him to say.
So I'll solicit kind of opinion from both the CAO and Mr. McDonald and second, Councillor Schumaker, but I think the challenge that we have with your proposal is that the decision before us tonight is in the context of the EA, right, which has three things: status quo, which I think it's clear to everybody involved is not acceptable. Moving to Huron Street, which we have, a decent set of detailed information in front of us on, and then staying where we are on Dennis Street, which Councillor Nero is saying, I don't have enough information on that option if we choose that option. So I think the referral motion that Councillor Shoemaker, Councillor Nero is proposing is consistent with the decision in front of us tonight. I think what you're proposing would be something that would be visited if this matter fails and we decide not to relocate it, and that's off the table, right? And then we are where we are, and council doesn't want to put the investment into that, then I think we would have to, at that point, go back to a drawing board and consider, a broader set of options. But I welcome Mr. White's input on that, and then if Mr. McDonald had anything he wanted to add in direct reference to your question, then I'd be happy to hear that. Mr. White?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. As the mayor's pointed out, the decision before you is based on the EA before you. What you're suggesting is beyond the scope of that EA. I think really that may become, what you're proposing would become something for discussion if both the relocation to Huron Street or a rebuild or new build of Huron Street did not receive council approval. In essence, it's a variant on the do nothing approach in that you wouldn't follow any of the options, and then we'd have to start again with a broader process. I'll defer to Mr. McDonald if he wants to add anything.
Mr. McDonald, did you want to add anything to those comments?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. This would not be starting from scratch by any sort of imagination. What it would be creating another alternative and then comparing that apples to apples to the other two alternatives that were already looked at. And sorry, Brent, to throw you under the proverbial bus here, but I believe there was some sort of, I've been waiting all night to use that line. I believe there was some discussions with the ACI or ACR regarding that building on mall property.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. McDonald, yes, you're correct. Myself and Mr. Ver did have discussions with the property owners of the mall at the onset as a possible option, and at that time it was not something that they would entertain.
Okay, so Councillor Shoemaker, I think it's kind of clear on the referral motion, and we would follow this process through and then move on, and depending on how it ended.
Yeah, so that I'm satisfied with that.
Okay, so I think I had said Councillor Vezowalan next. Am I correct in that respect? Councillor Vezowalan, go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor, and this just determines context of the referral motion. Mr. McDonald, you did say both verbally and in your report that the existing terminal really could not be refurbished to allow for accessible washrooms, that there's not enough room. So could you elaborate on that so it could be clear for Mr. Lamming and Mr. Ver that if we can't fulfill the AODA requirements with the existing building, that not even having that as an option to refurbish, but actually a tear down and a rebuild would need to happen?
I think that's what Councillor Nero is asking for an assessment of, but happy to have Mr. McDonald's comments.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Vezowalan. The existing building does pose significant challenges to upgrade to current AODA compliance. For example, the current building code for barrier-free washrooms requires a certain turning radius for wheelchair users, in addition to various items, code-compliant items like full-size adult change tables. The square footage of those washrooms just is not there, and with the configuration on how they're stacked, one washroom, in order to make it larger to comply, would eat into the other washroom, and in turn, and then that washroom would then spill over into the staff area or amenity area that's for the public. With that, there would be moving plumbing, moving electrical. It would not be an easy task. It can be done, but it is a chore.
So it needs to be a new build. It cannot be a refurbishment. In your, because then would there be washrooms for staff and patrons?
No, I believe it could be rebuilt. However, there are a number of factors which I'd want to look at in addition to that. For example, the life cycle cost analysis. Are we addressing the other considerations in the problem opportunity statement? And we'd have to weigh all those together.
Okay, but just to be clear, that the referral would state a demolition and a rebuild. Is that what you're looking for?
That's what Councilor Nero is requesting.
Okay, I just wanted to be clear on that. Thank you.
Okay, so Councilor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship. First of all, I'm glad to hear about this potential referral. And so my first question is to Mr. McDonald. I think tonight's discussion has been welcomed, and I believe that our community will have more ideas and more suggestions. So I'm under the impression that they can probably email you directly, or should they email Mr. Lamming if they have any more suggestions or questions, just to keep the communication open. It seems that because of the emails received, the phone calls received, this obviously is a very hot topic, important topic to many of our citizens. So where should further comments be forwarded to?
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Essentially what we would do is do an amendment to the EA, which means we would publish a new notice of study amendment or alternative. In that, again, we will provide contact information, and we would probably go back out and solicit additional public comment.
Okay, and so good. And question back to you is obviously you'll be using our local media partners as well, or how will you be outreaching to the public?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, we would actually defer the public outreach to the city's communication position, and they would send that out to their normal course of channels, which I believe does include the local media, newspapers, city website. We'll also put it on our website. Maybe Mr. Lamming can expand on that. I'm not sure the exact mailing list that.
Through Mr. Mayor to Mr. McDonald, yes, we'd use our corporate communications area to transmit any information. I see the CEO has something to add.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth and the rest of council, the exact processes in how staff is going to fulfill the referral function will be discussed tomorrow by staff if it's so approved.
Okay, thank you. And just one last question to probably our CAO, Mr. White. A constituent emailed me, actually 2 constituents. Will there be impact on the potential plaza if this goes through? Could there be potentially financial impact?
I don't think that that's relevant to the referral motion, Councillor Hollingsworth. So we would have that discussion, broader discussion, maybe in the context of the decision council was going to make when the matter came back before council.
Okay, that's fair. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, Councillor Hilsinger.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm definitely in favor of the referral motion, but I do have a question, and it's around, there was a lot of information to read here, and I do apologize, and please direct this question to whomever would be the appropriate person. There was a lot of information to read, but one of the things that we all think is important is to improve the service to our current riders, but how do we grow it? How do we get more people taking public transit because it's efficient, because it cuts down on greenhouse gas emissions, because et cetera, et cetera. And I don't remember seeing anything in any of the feedback that where we approached folks who don't use public transit now, and what in relationship to a terminal or other services would get them to change their habits. Is that somewhere and I missed it? Or is it even actually, I think other words, is it part of an EA scope?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Hilsinger, I think more of that information would have been found in the discussion on the transit route optimization study. Okay. Certainly that has informed this EA to a degree, but I think on that topic, you're seeing more of that in the transit optimization route study.
But that is 5 or 6 years old now, or give or take?
I'll defer to Mr. Laming as to how old it is.
The route optimization study was 2018, and from that we adjusted the routes, and that's when we had some big changes. We had record ridership of 1.9 million, resulting in 2019. We also engaged in the partnership with social services, where we're all giving bus passes. So we really seen ridership take off just before COVID, and we were trending that way in 2020 in January and February as well. So hopefully, once things get back to more of a normal state, we'll be seeing those numbers go up again.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Laming. Thanks, Mr. White.
Okay, so Councillor Shoemaker has a follow-up question on a comment, so I'm going to go back to Councillor Shoemaker.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. It was just on the discussion, I think it was between Councillor Hollingsworth and Mr. McDonald. I didn't appreciate that Councillor Nero's referral would essentially require a revisiting of the EA. So I wonder whether it's possible, or whether I can add to the referral to determine whether there are other alternatives out there. Obviously, I would be thinking of the old ACR station, but if there are other alternatives out there that warrant further exploring. I guess I'm struggling with this, with Mr. McDonald's comment at the outset that he was asked about moving it to 111 Huron Street, and I don't understand that to be the way EAs typically work. So
Councillor Shoemaker, why don't we just address that? So Mr. McDonald, Councillor Shoemaker is kind of trying to in the context of the referral motion, get to the root of what you had suggested earlier. So why don't you just speak directly to that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, that is a very, very good observation. The alternatives were as a result of the recommendations of the transit route optimization study, where they defined the alternatives to look at, or recommended the alternatives to look at.
So we took their alternatives as our starting point.
That is my understanding. I'd have to defer to Mr. Laming.
Do any city staff want to address that, Mr. Laming?
To you, Mr. Mayor, and Councillor Shoemaker, yes, that was the starting point of the recommendation that originated from that study.
Okay. I guess I'd be less interested in getting this back in July, and more interested in having a process that looks at all alternatives and comes up with a preferred alternative, rather than what I am hearing was the case, which was we started with an alternative that was already suggested to us in a different study. So to the extent that can fit within Councillor Nero's referral, or if Councillor Nero is willing to in any way amend his referral, that's where I would like to see this go.
Okay, well, so Councillor Nero.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Shoemaker brought up the point that I wanted to get clarification on again first. And I am a little confused at this point, so need that clarification before I answer that question. My understanding from Mr. McDonald that to look at a new build on the Dennis Street site, that we have to do a new EA for that. Did I understand that?
That was a confusing comment because I didn't understand that to be the case either. I understood that that isn't a new EA, but I can appreciate why all of you believe that might be the case now based on Mr. McDonald's comment.
Yeah, so I can't speak to Councillor Shoemaker's amendment to my referral unless I understand that.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. I apologize, perhaps I misspoke. No, it would be essentially, we would look at doing almost like an addendum to the EA, adding another alternative in and then comparing it to the existing ones. A consideration which we would have to look into further would be a new build, maybe a change in schedules to the EA. But I as of right now, I can't confirm that. Where it may bump up from an A+ to a Schedule B or something like that, should that be the preferred direction. But that was something we'd have to look at.
Okay, so I'm understanding because we've received comments back on this EA, either for this proposal or against this proposal. I don't see that, or do we have to go ask again out there? Do we put that question back out there? What do you feel about building on this site? I mean, people have.
I have the CEO is looking to speak here, Councilor Nero, so I'm going to give him that opportunity.
Sure.
To you, Mr. Mayor, and all of council, if you pass the referral as it was originally envisioned by Councilors Nero and Bruni, staff knows what you want, but we would have to discuss things after the council meeting to ensure that the process we would follow in determining the new information would fit in the EA process. What I would commit to is if we find that there's going to have to be significant deviation to any of that process, we would be back before you 2 weeks from now to let you know that. And at that point, you can make a decision whether you still wanted to go down that route or whether you wanted to move in a different path.
Okay, so Mr. CEO, for council's benefit, if the referral passes as Councilor Nero suggested, and it requires a significant deviation to the current EA, and there's a process that we have to follow that will be a substantial deviation from the process we followed, Mr. White will return the matter to council in 2 weeks to outline that, and council can make a further decision at that time. Am I accurately representing that, Mr. White?
Yes.
Councilor Nero?
And Mr. Mayor, by you saying council can make a further decision, would that include the suggestion that Councilor Shoemaker has about looking at other sites?
Yeah, I think my understanding, so obviously this has not been a discussion that I've had with staff, so I want to give them a chance to speak after. If staff leave this meeting on basis on your referral motion and it's determined we have to do a new EA or a significant deviation from the current EA, and that will require a process whereby other options are considered, like staff would return that to us in 2 weeks for that discussion. I think maybe in any event, Mr. White, so there's no confusion on council and no concern about process, is that we should return in 2 weeks in any event so you can outline to council what the path forward will be and give council the option to consider it at that time. Is that a fair suggestion from all parties, staff and council? Mr. White?
Yes, it is. I think under the circumstances, that's probably the best path.
Mr. Mayor, I've got some kind of rough wording. I'm wondering if Councilor Nero might consider, or all of council might consider, with respect to what I think we might be looking for, which is resolve that staff bring information to City Council at the June 28th, 2021 meeting with respect to a path forward on the transit EA that considers further alternatives to be decided on at that time, or something along those lines. I think we're looking for them to come back to us in 2 weeks with a path forward on alternatives.
Well, listen, if I'm going to ask the CEO if he's got clarity on that and understands what you're asking for to begin with, and then I'll go back to the mover and seconder and determine if they're consider that to be consistent with the resolution we're debating. Mr. CEO, do you want to just respond to Councillor Shoemaker there and just confirm whether or not you're clear on what's being requested?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, should a motion like that pass, and given the discussion that's occurred tonight, staff would return in 2 weeks, I think, to do two things. One, they would let you know what the path would be, however simple or difficult that would be as a process, in responding to the referral motion that was first put forward to us. And that's simply looking at a new build on Dennis Street, and we would let you know what that process would look like. We can also let you know what the process would look like to expand the view and look at further alternatives. So I would see a report coming back to you in 2 weeks, canvassing those two areas. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that satisfies your request, Councillor Shoemaker. And I think so, to not complicate things, if we stay with the original motion, what Mr. White is saying to us is that you'll get that path back. And at the time, they can also return a path that would outline what it would look like if we opened up the EA to multiple other considerations. Is that fair, Mr. White? Did I characterize that correctly? That addresses your concern, Councillor Shoemaker?
Yes, although I understood Malcolm to be saying something just slightly different than what you were saying. If he passed my motion, it would encompass Rick's, but if he passed Rick's, it might not necessarily encompass mine.
Sure. Is that what you were saying, Mr. CEO?
Councillor Shoemaker is correct. However, I think we can get to the same point with either being passed.
To me, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other with what the CEO has said on the record here. But so the motion currently is Councillor Shoemaker, Councillor Neros, and seconded by Councillor Bruni. So it's up to them on how and whether they want to amend it, or if they're comfortable just tabling it as it is based on the CEO's representations and everything we've said here and open council. So Councillor Nero, we'll go back to you.
I guess, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'm comfortable leaving it the way it is, but with the understanding that my understanding right now is that Councillor Shoemaker's concerns will come back and we'll be able to address them in 2 weeks, should they not be addressed on the path forward.
Can you confirm that, Mr. White?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Bruni?
Fine, thank you.
Okay. So Council, we still have that motion in front of us. Any further question or comment on it? All in favor? Motion is carried unanimously. So we will have the matter returned to us in 2 weeks. Madam Clerk? You're on mute, Madam Clerk.
All this time. That takes us to bylaws. And I have a motion by Councillors Christian and Gardy, resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date June 14, 2021 be approved.
All in favor? Carried.
And then I have a motion to go into closed session. The motion by Councillors Christian and Gardy, resolved that this council moves into closed session to discuss one item concerning the security of property and one item concerning labor relations or employee negotiations. Further be it resolved that should the said closed session be adjourned, the council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matters without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor? Motion's carried.
A motion by Councillors Hollingsworth and Scott that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? Carried. I will see you in closed, council.